Picture a city of 4 million people and imagine that roughly half of them have a secret. Not a secret they chose to keep. A secret they were ordered to keep, trained from childhood to keep, and punished for accidentally revealing. A secret that showed up every month whether they wanted it to or not, demanded their attention, caused them real physical pain, and was simultaneously treated as proof of their weakness and never spoken about aloud. That's Victorian London. That's Victorian women. And that's what we're talking about tonight. Add to that picture a world where your body is considered medically dangerous for approximately 1 week out of every 4, where a doctor might tell you with complete sincerity that reading a novel during those days could permanently damage your uterus, where your employer might dock your wages or dismiss you outright if he suspects you're having what the Victorians called in their delicate way a difficult time, where the closest thing to a sanitary product is a strip of old flannel pinned to your undergarments with a safety pin, and you have to wash that flannel yourself, secretly, by hand, and dry it somewhere it won't be seen, because if the wrong person sees it, the shame is yours to carry. That's not the Dark Ages. That's 1876. That's not the peasant hovels of the medieval countryside. That's London, the greatest city in the world, they said, the centre of civilization, the empire on which the sun never sets, a place where you could attend a lecture on the newest theories of chemistry in the afternoon and walk home past a woman crouched in a doorway, soaking rags in a bucket of cold water, trying not to be seen. We're going back there tonight. Not as tourists looking at the grand buildings and the famous parks and the portraits of stern-faced Victorians who look like they never once had a bodily function. We're living it. One day, one person, everything she would have seen, felt, smelled, feared, and survived. Her name is Eleanor Marsh. She's 22 years old. She works as a counter assistant at Pemberton and Sons, a draper's shop on Oxford Street, one of the longest and noisiest commercial streets in the whole city. She's been there 4 years. She knows her job, knows her customers, knows the precise weight of a bolt of merino wool and which end of the counter gets the afternoon light. She also knows exactly what day it is this morning. She knew before she opened her eyes. So, I make these history episodes, and I genuinely have no idea if anyone actually falls asleep to them, or if you're all just people who lie awake at 3 in the morning learning horrifying things about the past and calling it self-care. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable, turn the lights down, here we go. Your eyes open to darkness, that half-second of mercy before you remember, before the fog of sleep clears and the knowledge comes flooding back in. You had it yesterday. You went to bed hoping. You woke up during the night and lay very still, as if being still could change anything, and you counted the days and told yourself maybe this month, maybe you miscounted, maybe you've got one more day. You haven't got one more day. You know this before you even move. There's a heaviness in your lower back, a specific kind of pressure that sits just above your hips, like something heavy and hot has been placed there while you slept. And lower than that, deeper than that, a cramp that hasn't quite started yet but is sitting at the base of your stomach like a clenched fist waiting to open. You've been feeling this for 7 years, since you were 15, and your mother sat you down on the edge of your bed in your family's 2-room flat in Whitechapel, and explained what was happening to you with a look on her face that was somewhere between sympathy and brisk practicality, because sympathy alone didn't feed anyone in your family, and the practical matter of what to do about it couldn't wait. 7 years of this. 48 times, approximately, Give or take the months when stress or sickness or simple hunger push the whole thing off schedule. 48 times of this same morning, this same weight, this same knowledge, and every single time the first thing you feel is not pain exactly, it's not even fear exactly, it's the calculation, the mental arithmetic that starts before you're fully awake, before you've even committed to opening your eyes. How many days until the weekend? Is there anything at the shop this week you can't miss? What are you wearing today, and is it a colour that will show? How much flannel is left in your drawer? Did you soak the last of it properly, or did you rush it? Is there anything on today that will require you to be standing in one place for more than 2 hours at a time? This is what it means to be a woman in 1876, London. Not the grand things, not the political conversations about women's rights, though those exist too, and you've read some of the pamphlets, passed hand to hand among the girls at the shop, with the same combination of excitement and wariness you might feel handling something slightly illegal. Not the big injustices, the small ones, the daily arithmetic, the calculation that starts before you open your eyes. The room is cold. It's always cold in October. The single window in the room you share with your younger sister Maud faces the courtyard, and the courtyard faces nothing, and the nothing is London air, which is to say it's a particular kind of cold that has layers in it. The cold of stone and brick and coal smoke, the cold of 10,000 chimneys pumping soot into the sky since before dawn, the cold of a city that runs on coal and labour and has no interest in warming the attic rooms of its working women. You share the room with Maud, who is 17 and works as a milliner's apprentice in Marylebone, and the two of you together pay 3 shillings and 6pence a week for this room, which is cheap by the standards of decent lodgings and still represents roughly a third of your combined income after everything else is paid. Maud is still asleep. You can hear her breathing in the other bed, slow and even. She doesn't know yet. About the other thing she has to look forward to in her own body's arithmetic. About what it means to do this on a working wage in a city that doesn't stop for you. Your mother talked to you, but your mother is 2 years dead now, and talking to Maud is something you've been putting off in the same way you put off looking at the hole that's developing in the sole of your left boot. Necessary. Coming. Not quite yet. You lie still for another moment. Just one. The mattress is thin, and the springs have seen better days, and the stuffing shifts when you move. But right now, with the blanket pulled up to your chin and the cold held at bay, there's a peculiar peace in not moving yet. Then the cramp arrives properly, and peace ends. It starts in your lower abdomen and radiates upward, and it's not sharp, not exactly. More like a pressure that becomes a squeeze that becomes a wave, and you breathe through it the way your mother taught you to breathe through things, steadily, through the nose. Don't make a sound. There's a sound in the wall above you. The family upstairs, the Jennings family, 3 children and a father who works nights and a mother who works days, already starting their morning. Footsteps, the thud of small feet, a child's voice quickly hushed. 6:15. The church bell will ring in 15 minutes. You have to get up. Getting up on a normal morning takes approximately 8 minutes. You've timed it the way you time everything now, because time is the only resource you have that's actually yours, and even that one is mostly taken. Wash your face, do your hair, dress, check yourself in the little piece of mirror propped against the wall. You don't own a full-length mirror. You know your appearance from the neck up with great precision, and you trust the feel of everything below that. The tightness of the corset laces in your back, whether the hem of your skirt is level, whether the collar lies flat. This morning, 8 minutes is not going to be enough. You push back the blanket and sit up carefully, and the cramp tightens in response, and you wait until it loosens, and then you stand. The floorboards are cold through your stockings. You didn't take your stockings off last night because the room was too cold to undress fully, and anyway your feet get cold in the night, and you've learned over the years that the small humiliations of sleeping in your stockings are worth the slightly warmer feet. Your work dress is on the hook behind the door. Dark navy blue, which is the colour all the counter assistants at Pemberton and Sons are required to wear, which is a practical decision on the management's part, and has nothing to do with your comfort or preference. Though dark colours are also practical for other reasons, as every woman working a long shift knows. But first, before the dress, before anything else, there's the other thing. You open your top drawer as quietly as you can, so as not to wake Maud. Underneath your spare collar and your second pair of stockings and the letter from your Aunt Margaret in Birmingham that you've been meaning to answer for 6 weeks, there are the strips of flannel. You keep them folded, tucked, beneath the other things. Not hidden, exactly, 'cause Maud knows they're there and what they're for, just positioned so that they require a deliberate act to access, so that their presence isn't the first thing anyone sees when the drawer is opened. There are 4 clean ones. Good. You washed them 3 nights ago, hanging them to dry on the line behind the building in the dark, 'cause you never ever hang them in daylight where anyone might see them, and brought them back in before morning. The design, if you can call it that, is simple. Strips of flannel about 4 inches wide and 12 inches long. You fold them in thirds lengthwise, and then you pin them to the inside of your drawers with safety pins, front and back. Your mother showed you this. Her mother showed her. This is the accumulated wisdom of generations of women passed down not in books or pamphlets, but in bedrooms and washhouses, woman to woman, usually in a low voice, always with a certain matter-of-fact briskness that is its own kind of tenderness. The pin goes in at the front through the flannel and the fabric of the drawers, another at the back. You test the tension, shift your weight, make sure nothing is going to shift when you walk. You've lost count of the number of times in your first year of working a long shift that the whole arrangement gave way at precisely the wrong moment, and you had to make your way to the necessary and fix it, and the 5 minutes you were gone were noted and remarked on by the floor walker. Mr. Pierce, the floor walker. You will think about Mr. Pierce in a moment, but not yet. The cramp comes again, stronger this time, and you grip the edge of the dresser and breathe. It passes. It always passes. That's the thing your mother told you that turned out to be the most useful and the most maddening truth. It always passes, and it always comes back. You draw on your drawers, then your petticoats, one after another, and then you reach for the corset. The corset is a matter of genuine complexity on days like this. The stays compress your abdomen. On ordinary days, this produces a certain discomfort that you've mostly stopped noticing, the way you've stopped noticing the smell of coal smoke or the sound of the street. On days like today, the compression pressing against cramping muscles produces something a step above ordinary discomfort. Not quite pain, or maybe exactly pain, just pain that you're not allowed to acknowledge or act on because there's a 10-hour shift ahead and the lacing has to be done regardless. You lace yourself as loosely as you dare, not so loose that the silhouette suffers, because the silhouette matters at Pemberton's, especially on the floor. Not so loose that it shows, just enough to give yourself a half-inch more space to breathe. Maud stirs in her bed, rolls over. Early, she murmurs, without opening her eyes. Same as always, you say, keeping your voice low. Go back to sleep. She does. She's 17 and sleeps like the dead, and you love her for it. The dress goes on over everything. The buttons at the back are the usual morning problem, the reason you've developed a complicated relationship with your own shoulder joints, the contortions required to fasten 12 buttons up your own spine without assistance. By the time you've finished, your cramp has shifted from a wave to a low, steady ache. The kind that will sit with you all day like an uninvited guest. You check the mirror. You look fine. You look like Eleanor Marsh, who works at Pemberton and Sons on Oxford Street, and has done for 4 years, and is entirely fine, thank you. This is the skill you've spent 7 years perfecting, looking entirely fine. The smell in your room in the morning is what it always is. Coal dust from the grate, and the particular smell of 2 women living in a small space, and underneath it something iron-tinged that you notice, and more doesn't yet, not really, and that you try not to dwell on. The cold keeps it minimal. Summer is worse. Summer is always worse. You fold the used flannel from last night into a small bundle and put it in the basin with some cold water to soak. You'll deal with it tonight. The water is clear for now, but won't be by the time you get home, and you've trained yourself not to think about that too hard in the mornings, because mornings require efficiency, and mornings are not the time for feelings. In the kitchen, which is the ground floor room shared by all 4 sets of lodgers in the building, you make your tea. The fire is already lit. Someone got up early, possibly Mrs. Brant from the first floor who keeps baker's hours. You drink your tea standing up because the cramp is slightly better when you're upright, and you eat a piece of bread with a scraping of dripping, because breakfast cannot be skipped, because on days like this you burn through everything faster, and the afternoon will be impossible if you don't eat something now. Outside, through the narrow kitchen window, the October morning is the colour of pewter. Smoke rising from the street beyond the courtyard wall. The sound of a cart on the cobblestones. Somewhere, a child crying and being hushed. This city wakes up all at once, all of it, simultaneously. A great mass inhalation at approximately 5 in the morning, and then the endless noise until midnight. You finish your bread. You finish your tea. You pull on your coat, which is better than last winter's coat, but only marginally, and you wrap your scarf twice around your neck because October on Oxford Street means wind that funnels straight down the pavement and finds its way through every gap. You check, one more time, that everything is secure. This is the other calculation, the paranoid, constant, background calculation, whether anything will show, whether the arrangement will hold, whether you'll be able to feel if something has gone wrong before it becomes visible to anyone else. You've never had an actual incident at the shop. You've had close calls. You've had the 5-minute panic in the necessary, repinning with shaking hands, checking the fabric, calculating whether the dark navy would show or not. You've had evenings where you got home and found more evidence of the day than you'd realised, and you stood in the kitchen with your coat still on, just breathing, just grateful that you made it. You pick up your bag. You go to work. The walk to Oxford Street takes 20 minutes, down through the Marylebone back streets, past the boarding houses and the workshops and the small shops just beginning to open their shutters, past the costermongers setting up their carts, the smell of vegetable and bruised fruit mixing with the coal smoke, past the woman selling hot coffee from a tin urn on the corner of Wigmore Street, who has been there every morning for as long as you've been walking this route, whose face you know and whose name you don't. You walk quickly. Walking quickly is better. Forward motion keeps the cramp from settling too deeply. Here is something they won't tell you, because this is not the kind of thing that gets written down in the medical journals or discussed at the lectures Eleanor Garrett Anderson gives to her fellow physicians in the small rooms off Marylebone Road. They won't tell you that walking actually helps. That movement, the specific kind of forward movement of walking a brisk 20 minutes, eases the cramping in a way that lying still doesn't. But you learn this yourself. In the empirical way, women learn most things about their own bodies through trial and repeated observation. Because nobody told you. Nobody told you anything beyond the basic mechanics of what to do about the flannel and the pins and the cold water. What your mother told you, it happens every month. It lasts between 4 and 7 days. You use the flannel and the pins, you don't make a fuss, you carry on. What your mother didn't tell you, because she didn't know, because nobody told her either, why it happens, how to make it hurt less, that there are other women, educated women, who are beginning to argue publicly that this monthly cycle is not a sickness at all, not the evidence of female weakness that the doctors claim, but a perfectly ordinary physical function that requires nothing more dramatic than a few practical adjustments to continue living a normal life. What the doctors told you, at least what they told the version of you who could afford to see a doctor, the opposite of that. The doctors told you that menstruation is a period of physiological crisis, that your system is under strain, that exertion during this time risks permanent damage to your reproductive organs, that you should rest, that you should avoid excitement, that you should definitely avoid mental strain, which means don't read anything too taxing, don't engage in complicated thought, don't go to evening lectures. What the doctors did not tell you, that the advice to rest was for women who could afford to rest, that the advice to avoid exertion was for women who had a choice about whether to exert themselves, that there is a very large class of women in this city whose reproductive organs will simply have to manage their physiological crisis while standing at a counter for 10 hours, or bending over a sewing machine for 12, or carrying coal up 6 flights of stairs for 14. Because the rent is due Friday, and nobody at the coal merchants gives discounts for menstrual distress. The church bells are ringing 6:30 as you turn onto Oxford Street. You're on time. Just. Oxford Street in October at 6:30 in the morning is already a different world from the back streets you walk through to get here. This is the commercial artery. Wider, louder, more of everything. The omnibuses have started running and their horses' hooves clatter on the paving stones, and the drivers shout at each other across the width of the street. The shop fronts are being swept, shutters being removed, the elaborate arrangements of goods in the windows being freshened and adjusted. Pemberton and Sons occupies a double frontage on the east side of the street, between a haberdasher and a chemist. It's not the grandest establishment on Oxford Street, not by far, but it's respectable, solid. The window display is changed every week, supervised by Mr. Pemberton himself, and the counter assistants are expected to maintain a standard of appearance and conduct that reflects the shop's reputation. You go round the back. Counter assistants always go round the back, through the delivery entrance in the side alley, because using the front entrance before opening is simply not done. You've never questioned this rule. You've stopped questioning a lot of rules. The back entrance smells of wood polish and the particular stuffiness of bolts of fabric stored in a closed space. Your coat goes on the hook assigned to you. Your scarf goes with it. You smooth your hair in the small mirror on the wall and make the last check of yourself that you'll be able to make for the next 2 hours. Fine. You're fine. Morning, Nellie. Agnes Pearce is already at her station, straightening the reels of ribbon on her section of the counter. Agnes is 31. has been at Pemberton's for 9 years, knows everything about the shop and knows something else too. Something you realised within your first week of working beside her. She knows what day it is for every woman on the counter, not as gossip. Agnes isn't a gossip, as practical intelligence, the way a general knows the positions of all his troops. She looks at you now, a quick assessing glance, and something in her expression shifts almost imperceptibly. "I've got the extra pins," she says quietly, already turning back to her ribbons. "Left side of the bottom drawer, under the price sheets." You don't say anything. You don't have to. This is the language of the counter, the subterranean channel of communication that runs under all the official conversation about goods and customers and the floor walker's instructions. Nods that mean one thing in front of customers and another between the women. A particular way of positioning your body at the counter that signals to the woman next to you that you need a cover for 60 seconds. You've been on this counter long enough to be fluent. "Thank you," you say, in a voice that sounds like you're talking about the ribbon display. Agnes nods once and goes back to her work. The floor opens at 8 o'clock. Mr. Pierce, the floor walker, appears at 7:30 for his pre-opening inspection, walking the length of the counter with his hands behind his back and his expression that never quite changes from its default setting of dissatisfied expectation. He's 45, married, has 3 daughters whom he never talks about, and runs this floor with a precision that would be admirable if it wasn't quite so relentless. He stops at your station. You stand straight, both hands on the counter's edge, the approved resting position, stock arranged neatly, price cards legible, yourself, composed, professional, entirely fine. "Miss Marsh." His eyes move over you briefly, assessing the usual things. Dress clean, hair tidy, posture correct. "Mr. Pierce." He moves on. "This is what passing looks like. This is what 7 years of practice looks like." But here is the thing that Mr. Pierce doesn't know, that he cannot know, that is in fact the reason a certain elaborate architecture of knowledge and accommodation has grown up among the women on his counter floor. Mr. Pierce believes that his counter assistants are, for the purposes of their working hours, essentially mechanisms. Efficient, presentable, controllable mechanisms for converting customer interest into sales. He has no conceptual framework for the idea that these mechanisms might contain, say, cramping abdominal muscles and the specific low-grade anxiety of hoping nothing shows through dark navy blue. His rules are the rules of the shop. No sitting during working hours, no leaving the floor without express permission, no visiting the necessary more than twice per shift unless accompanied by a medical note, no eating or drinking on the floor, no loud conversation between assistants, no expressions of strong emotion. These are the rules of a world designed without reference to bodies, or rather, designed with reference to a certain kind of body, the kind that doesn't get periods, the kind that can stand for 10 hours without calculating on an hourly basis whether the flannel is still holding. You know what happens if you ask Mr. Pierce for a 3rd visit to the necessary in a morning. You've seen it happen to a girl named Clara who worked your counter 18 months ago. Clara asked for a 3rd visit, and Mr. Pierce asked her what the medical reason was, and Clara, who was 19 and had only been at Pemberton 6 months, made the mistake of telling him the truth. Not in detail, just the truth, that she was in some distress because of the time of the month. Mr. Pierce's expression did something complicated. His face moved through discomfort, disapproval, and a kind of aggressive embarrassment that settled into cold efficiency. "If you are unwell," he said. "You should have reported your incapacity this morning, and a replacement would have been arranged." Clara said she wasn't unwell, she just needed a few minutes. "Counter assistants are either well enough to work or they are not," Mr. Pierce said. "There is no category of being partly well enough. If you require a third absence from the floor, I must ask you to consider whether you should be here at all today." He said this in a tone that made it clear what the cost of choosing to go home would be. Not your wages for the day, the implicit message about your reliability, your professional suitability, your future at Pemberton and Sons. Clara went back to the counter. She stood there for the remaining 4 hours of her shift with her face a shade paler than usual and a rigidity to her spine that anyone who knew her would recognise. She left Pemberton's 3 weeks later, not over this, but over this, partly, over the accumulation of things like this. You knew better than to replicate Clara's mistake. You'd been at Pemberton's 3 years by then, and you'd already learned the arithmetic of necessary invisibility. You've been doing it so long it doesn't feel like a skill anymore. It just feels like what you are. The doors open at 8 o'clock. The morning rush begins. The first customer of the day is a woman in her 50s, expensively dressed, with a particular manner of someone who considers themselves to be doing the shop a favour by entering it. She wants black ribbon. She wants several yards of it, and she wants it to be exactly the right weight for a morning trim, and she wants Eleanor to help her determine which of the 3 slightly different blacks is the truest, the deepest, the most appropriate for the occasion. You help her determine this with every ounce of professional attention you possess. You explain the difference between grosgrain and satin ribbon, between dull and lustrous finishes, between the weight appropriate for sleeve trimming versus hat trimming versus the dense, formal edging of a widow's cap. You measure out a sample lengths with the brass yardstick kept under the counter. You fold them over your hand so she can see how the fabric drapes. Your lower back aches. There's a specific new cramp developing on the left side, which means today is going to be the heavier first day and not the lighter kind. You've learned to categorize your own cycles the way a meteorologist categorizes weather systems. First day can be one of our 2 varieties, the kind that's heavy immediately and eases by evening, or the kind that builds slowly through the day and hits worst around 4 in the afternoon. Today is the former, which is actually, in the context of a 10-hour shift, slightly better. You smile at the woman with the morning ribbon. You agree that the darkest grosgrain is indeed the most appropriate for a widow's cap trim. You measure her 3 yards and a quarter extra, because Agnes taught you years ago that you always give a quarter yard extra and never mention it, and the customer always comes back. She leaves satisfied. The morning builds. By 9 o'clock the floor is busy. The kind of busy that leaves no time for the background calculation because all your attention is occupied with customers, with finding stock, with answering questions about the relative merits of merino wool versus cashmere for a winter bodice. You know the answer to this question. You know the answer to approximately 3,000 similar questions. 4 years is enough to become fluent in the language of fabric, and you are fluent, and this fluency is one of the genuinely good things about your working life. But by 10:30, the cramp has settled into the low, grinding ache that will be your companion for the next 3 days, and your feet, which are always a consideration on long shifts, are adding their own complaint. And you're very aware of the fact that you've been standing in one spot for approximately 2.5 hours with only the length of the counter, maybe 12 feet, as your walking range. This is something none of the medical literature discusses, the specific torture of being required to stand completely still while your body is actively protesting that position. Sitting would help. A brief walk would help. Even just shifting your weight differently would help. But the counter's approved posture is upright. Both feet on the ground, hands at rest, back straight. You shift your weight very slightly. 5 degrees. Nothing visible from the customer side. The cramp doesn't care. Here is what the Victorians believed about menstruation, and it's worth understanding this fully because it shapes everything. Every rule, every restriction, every conversation you'll have today that touches on this subject. The prevailing medical view in 1876 is that menstruation is a period of pathological vulnerability. Your nervous system is temporarily compromised. Your constitution is under strain. The very process of menstruation involves, according to the most respected medical authorities of the day, such a significant expenditure of vital energy that any additional demand on your system, physical or mental, risks disrupting the process itself and causing permanent damage to your reproductive health. This is Dr. Edward Tilt's view, stated clearly in his influential book on the management of women's health. This is Dr. Henry Maudsley's view, cited in his 1874 argument against allowing women into universities. The menstrual week, Maudsley argued, with complete confidence, requires such a concentration of vital force in the reproductive organs that the diversion of energy to intellectual work during this period will result in permanent neurological damage. Women who attempt serious intellectual work while menstruating risk, he said, permanent invalidism. Let that sit for a moment. Let that settle into what it means in practice. It means that Dr. Maudsley, in 1874, wrote a serious academic paper arguing that women should be barred from university examinations, not because women aren't intelligent, but because the months during which university examinations take place happen to coincide with the months during which women might be menstruating, and the combination would destroy them. He was taken seriously. He was cited. His work was used in parliamentary debates. And you are standing on a shop floor in Oxford Street with a cramp in your lower abdomen and 2.5 hours until you can request a visit to the necessary, thinking about none of this, because you are not permitted the luxury of thinking about this. You are thinking about whether the navy merino the woman in front of you is currently examining is the right weight for the travelling costume she's describing, and whether the price is something she'll accept, and whether you can subtly redirect her to the slightly more expensive bolt without her noticing she's been redirected. You can, and you do, and she takes 4 yards. The necessary visit happens at 11:15. Agnes covers your position without being asked. You walk to the back of the shop, down the corridor past the stockroom, through the door marked staff only, and you do what you need to do, and you repin what needs repinning, and you check, and everything is fine, and you wash your hands in the small basin with the cake of carbolic soap that smells of nothing pleasant, and feel both relieved and slightly angry, and then stop feeling the anger because the anger isn't useful, and you go back to the floor. Mr. Pierce notices you've been gone. He doesn't say anything. He just looks at the clock in the way that makes you understand he's noted the time. You smile pleasantly and take your position. The afternoon arrives. Luncheon for counter assistants is taken in 2 rotations, in the small room behind the stockroom, 15 minutes each. You eat your bread and cold meat quickly, standing up because sitting changes the pressure, and you find you need a moment to breathe through the afternoon cramp, which has arrived early today, which means you were wrong about the variety, which means it's the second kind, which means 4 o'clock is going to be interesting. Agnes eats beside you. She's watching you with the peripheral vision assessment that is its own kind of care. Have you got your hot flannel? She asks quietly. You have a small flat bottle, stone, filled with near boiling water from the staff kettle, wrapped in a piece of cloth and tucked into the deep pocket of your dress. The heat does help. You know it helps. You've known this empirically for years before you read anything that explained why. The heat relaxes the muscle being the uterus, which is cramping in the very normal and ordinary way of a functional uterus doing its work, though nobody has ever described it to you in these terms. Yes, you say. Agnes nods. You'll need the extra pins by 3. The afternoon's heavier. She says this the way she might say the afternoon rain usually comes round 3. Not with drama, not with particular sympathy. With a matter-of-fact accuracy of someone who's been observing these patterns for a very long time and has catalogued them precisely. I know, you say. I've got some Dr. McMunn's in my bag if you want it. A pause. The tincture. For the pain. Dr. McMunn's elixir of opium. You're familiar with it. Most women on the floor are familiar with it or something like it. Godfrey's cordial, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, Batley's drops, various formulations of laudanum and its derivatives, sold over the counter at the chemist next door to Pemberton's, recommended by various authorities for the management of the monthly discomfort. The official prescription, when you do see a doctor, is usually some variation on the same theme: rest, warmth, and a small dose of something tincture-based if the pain is severe. The problem with the tincture is not the pain relief, which is real. The problem is the cotton wool feeling that follows it, the slight softening of the edges of the world, which is not compatible with standing at a counter for 4 more hours and giving accurate advice about the relative merits of different weights of wool flannel. I'll manage, you say. Agnes raises an eyebrow a 1/4 of an inch, which is her expression for, you're being unnecessarily stoic, but I respect your decision. Back to the floor. The afternoon customers are different from the morning ones, more of them in a hurry, more of them with complicated requirements. There's a woman who needs 12 yards of something for drawing room curtains and has very specific ideas about colour that don't match any of the actual colours available, and the negotiation of getting her from her ideas to something that actually exists takes 40 minutes. Your lower back has stopped aching and started throbbing. These are 2 distinct sensations, and the transition between them is not a good sign. You stand straight, both hands on the counter, expression pleasant and professional. You talk about curtain fabric with complete focus. You show her samples. You tell her what the afternoon light will do to the burgundy, how the deep green will read by lamplight. She buys 12 yards of the dark green at a reasonable price, and you count it out and fold it and wrap it in brown paper and tie the package with string, and your fingers work through all of this with the automated competence of 4 years' practice, while your awareness is focused on the lower right cramp that arrived about 20 minutes ago and is competing with the general ache for your attention. You log the sale in the counter book. You move to the next customer. This is what getting through things looks like from the outside. Smooth, continuous, professional, apparently effortless. This is what the majority of the women in this building look like, from the outside, at any given time, regardless of what their bodies are doing. The clock on the wall reads 3:15, 4 1/4 hours to close, but here is the thing that makes this particular afternoon different from the many identical afternoons that have come before it, and different again from the afternoon you might be having if you were not Eleanor Marsh at a counter in Oxford Street, but instead Eleanor Marsh in one of the other possible lives that this city contains. Because there are multiple Victorias at once, There are several cities inside this city, and the question of what a woman is allowed to do, required to do, prevented from doing during the week of her period depends enormously on which city she's standing in. If you were Lady Eleanor Marsh, which you are not, you would be resting today. Not because you chose to, but because the protocol of your household, the advice of your physician, the expectations of your social class would simply have arranged it. The morning's appointments would have been quietly cancelled. A note would have been sent. Lady Eleanor is indisposed. Everyone who received the note would have understood, because there is a language of female indisposition that everyone in polite society speaks, and nobody acknowledges. You would have stayed in bed until noon, then moved to the chaise longue in your sitting room, then perhaps taken a short, slow turn in the garden in the afternoon if the weather permitted and your energy allowed. Your maid would have brought you beef tea, which was the Victorian cure for everything, but was somehow specifically the cure for this. Your housekeeper would have ensured that the household ran without requiring your attention. You would have been uncomfortable, possibly very uncomfortable, but you would have been allowed to be uncomfortable. That allowance would have been the privilege. If you were the Eleanor Marsh who worked in the laundry of a large house in Belgravia, which is also not you but is a real woman who existed on this same October Tuesday, you would have been doing something physically far more brutal than standing at a counter. You would have been bent over a washboard, or feeding sheets through a mangle, or lifting and carrying wet linen in temperatures that oscillated between the scalding heat of the drying room and the cold of the stone-floored wash-house. The laundry's work week did not pause for anything. Mrs. Hobson, the laundress, had a simple calculus for this. If you can stand, you can work. If you cannot stand, you can go. Going meant losing your position, so nobody went. If you were Eleanor Marsh of the sweated trades, working at home making matchboxes or shirts or artificial flowers for the wages that worked out to somewhere around 4 shillings a week for 12-hour days, you would not have the luxury of going anywhere. The work was in your home, which was also your bedroom, which was also your kitchen, and stopping meant the piece rate dropped, which meant the week's earnings dropped, which meant something went unpaid. All of these Eleanor Marshes were real. All of them existed on this same Tuesday in October 1876 in this same city, roughly within walking distance of each other. And all of them, every single one, were having the same calculation. The arithmetic of continuing. You are the counter-assistant Eleanor Marsh, which is somewhere in the middle of these. You have a floor to stand on and a roof over your head during working hours, and a salary of 12 shillings a week, which is not a great deal, but is more than the laundry maid and considerably more than the matchbox maker. You have Agnes Pearce to your left, who has left a small paper packet of safety pins under the price sheets. You have the stone bottle of warm water in your pocket, which has cooled somewhat but still helps. You have 4 years of practice. You have 3 hours and 45 minutes until you can go home. The woman who comes to your counter at 4:30 is not the most challenging customer you've had today, but she is a particular kind of challenging, because she is the kind of customer who notices things. She's perhaps 35, well-dressed, with sharp observant eyes, and the manner of someone who has spent time in shops on both sides of the counter and knows how they work. She's looking for silk velvet ribbon. Specifically, she wants a particular shade of deep blue, almost indigo, that she saw on a hat in a shop window in Regent Street and has been trying to find ever since. You show her the velvet ribbon selection. She's not satisfied. She asks to see what's in the stock drawers behind you, which is technically an unusual request, but not impossible. You turn to the drawers, you open the second one, where the specialty ribbons are kept. The turn and the bend required to open the lower drawer produce a particular flash of pain, the specific kind that happens when the cramp catches a movement at exactly the wrong moment, and for a fraction of a second your vision does something flickery and you grip the edge of the drawer. Half a second, maybe less. You straighten up. You hold the ribbon swatch toward the light. There's this, you say. It's not quite indigo. It reads darker in low light. The woman is looking at you with a slight sharpness in her expression that suggests she noticed the half-second pause. She doesn't say anything. She takes the ribbon and holds it toward the window. This is a small and private humiliation, the kind of moment you can't anticipate, can't fully prevent, can only manage, the moment when the body interrupts the performance. I think this will do, the woman says, still looking at the ribbon. You measure her 3 yards. Your hands are steady. You've been through worse. She pays. She leaves. Agnes is beside you again, not obviously, just there. 20 minutes, Agnes says. Go when Patterson goes. He won't notice the timing. Patterson is the assistant on the end section who takes his afternoon necessary visit at around 5:10, regular as clockwork, which creates a small window of reduced scrutiny from Mr. Pierce's position near the entrance. Thank you, you say, for the second time today, in a voice that sounds like you're talking about the ribbons. Agnes nods and rearranges the velvet samples, and you both go back to work. Here is what you were told by a doctor. Not a great doctor, a dispensary doctor, the kind who sees 30 patients in a morning at the parish dispensary in Marylebone, who gives each patient approximately 4 minutes of his attention and charges a penny for the consultation. You were 19. You'd been at Pemberton's a year. The cramping had been getting worse, not dramatically, not alarmingly, just consistently worse than it had been when you were 16, 17, the way a lot of things that were manageable at 16 become less manageable at 19 when you're standing for 10 hours a day. Your mother had died 6 months before, which left Maud, who was 13, and you and your father, who worked at the dye works and drank most of what he earned, and the calculation was simple. Your wages plus whatever occasional work Maud could get in the milliner's shop, where she'd started as an errand girl. There was no one to ask about the cramping. Your mother was gone. The women at the shop didn't discuss it in anything other than practical terms, and practical terms were about management, not about whether management was supposed to hurt this much. So you went to the dispensary. The doctor was perhaps 50, efficient and not unkind, with an accent that placed him in the north of England and hands that were perpetually scrubbed to clean, the red clean of someone who washes compulsively, which is possibly the right approach for someone who sees 30 patients a day. He asked you questions. He asked about the regularity of the cycle, which was regular. He asked about the quantity, which was heavier than it used to be. He asked about the pain. You described the pain. He listened with the expression of someone confirming an expected diagnosis. Menstrual debility, he said. Very common. The nervous system is overtaxed. He asked about your work. You told him. He asked about your daily routine. You told him. The problem, he said, writing something in his notes, is the standing. The prolonged upright position during the menstrual period increases the downward pressure on the pelvic organs and aggravates the congestion. Congestion, this was the term. The menstruating uterus, according to the medical literature of the 1870s, was a congested organ. Blood pooling where it shouldn't. The solution logically was rest. Horizontal position, ideally. The reduction of all physical demands on the system. What you need, the doctor said, is complete rest during the first 2 days. Bed rest if possible. Warm baths to encourage the flow. Avoid all physical exertion. He looked at you over his notes with the expression of a man who knows he's prescribing something impossible. If rest isn't possible, he continued, which both of you knew it wasn't, then avoid cold. Keep the lower abdomen warm. Small doses of tincture of opium if the pain is severe. He wrote this out on a small slip of paper. You can get this at the chemist. Keep the doses small. Then he said the thing that stayed with you. This discomfort, he said, in the tone of someone completing an assessment, is essentially physiological. It's the female constitution under its natural strain. It will be worse during your working years and will typically resolve after you're married and have children, when the system settles into its proper function. You looked at him. The purpose of the monthly cycle, he continued in the patient tone of someone explaining something to a not very bright student, is the preparation of the body for conception. In a woman who has not yet fulfilled this purpose, the body is, in a sense, in a state of frustration. The distress you experience is in some degree the expression of that frustration. You were 19 years old, and your mother had been dead for 6 months, and you were standing in the dispensary in your work dress, and your penny was still in the doctor's saucer where you'd put it when you came in, and you were listening to a man in his 50s explain that your pain was the physical manifestation of your failure to have a husband and children. You picked up the note he'd written. You thanked him. You went back to work. What he did not tell you, because he didn't know, because no one had told him either, because the research had not been done in any serious way, because no one had done serious research on this subject, that what you were experiencing was likely dysmenorrhea, a specific medical condition involving increased production of prostaglandins in the uterine lining, causing the muscle to contract more intensely than normal, that it had nothing to do with your nervous system being overtaxed, that it had nothing to do with the downward pressure of upright posture, that the warm bath he prescribed was actually by coincidence useful, not because it encouraged the flow, but because the heat relaxed the prostaglandin-driven muscle contractions, that rest helped not because of the reduced downward pressure on a congested organ, but because the lying position happened to reduce the circulation of prostaglandins more broadly, and that the tincture of opium worked, but that 100 years later a simple anti-inflammatory tablet would work better, faster, and without the cotton wool effect. None of this was known. None of this language existed. What existed was the dispensary doctor and his 4 minutes per patient, and the theory of menstrual congestion, and the advice to rest that was given to a woman who couldn't rest, which meant the advice was not advice but a decoration, a medical frame around what was actually just. Carry on. There's nothing to be done. Carry on. This is not the doctor's fault exactly. He was working with what he had, and what he had was a medical tradition that had been systematically declining to investigate women's health in any serious way for approximately 300 years, because the women whose health was not being investigated were not in the rooms where the decisions about what to investigate were made. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, the first woman to qualify as a physician in England, who fought tooth and nail through every institution that tried to bar her, who took her exams while the Society of Apothecaries literally changed their rules to stop her after she had already passed them, who eventually opened her own dispensary for women and children in Marylebone, 4 streets from where you're standing right now, would have had something different to say about your cramping, would have taken longer than 4 minutes, would have asked different questions, would have known about the relationship between prostaglandins and uterine contractions, or rather, wouldn't have known, because the term didn't exist yet, but would have been building toward a framework that made more sense. But a dispensary charges sixpence, and you spent your penny already, and you're due back at Pemberton's in 30 minutes. You went back. You always went back. There is something you should know about the shop rules at Pemberton and Sons, and about the shop rules at most establishments of its type in 1876 London. And this is not something that will surprise you, but that needs to be said plainly because the plainness of it is its own kind of information. You're not allowed to sit. Not during working hours. There is no stool behind the counter. There is no chair. The approved posture is standing, and it is maintained from 8 in the morning to 6 in the evening, with the 15-minute luncheon break and 2 permitted visits to the necessary per shift. This is not an oversight. This is a decision. The Victorians had very developed ideas about what it meant for a woman to be in service, to be employed, to be present in a commercial establishment in a professional capacity. The standing posture communicated industry, readiness, deference. A sitting employee suggests an employee at leisure, which suggests an employee who considers herself as much at ease as the customer, which suggests an equality of status that certain Victorian employers found deeply problematic. The Seats for Shop Assistants Act will be passed in 1899, 23 years from now. It will require that employers provide seating for female shop assistants during moments when they're not actively serving customers. There will be a debate about whether allowing women to sit will undermine the appearance of industriousness. Several employers will argue that their female assistants prefer to stand. They will say this with complete sincerity, having never asked their female assistants. You know about this campaign because Agnes Pearce knows about it, and Agnes Pearce knows about everything. Agnes is one of those women who reads. Not novels, mostly, though she reads those too. She reads the newspapers, the reform press, the pamphlets that get passed around. She doesn't talk about it much at work, because work is not the place for it, but she knows. There's a petition going round, Agnes mentioned once in the luncheon room in an undertone, about the seating, 50,000 signatures they want. Will it work? You asked. Agnes considered this with the expression she brought to most questions, a kind of deliberate fairness, examining the evidence before committing to a conclusion. Eventually, she said, these things take eventually. You'd thought about that word. Eventually. It was the same word the dispensary doctor had used, in a different sense. It will resolve eventually. It will be easier eventually. Eventually, this city will stop asking you to perform fine precisely at the moments when performing fine is hardest. You're still waiting for eventually. 5 o'clock. The floor is thinning out. The light through the shop windows has changed from the thin October afternoon gold to the flatter, dimmer quality of early evening. The gas lights have been turned up. The last rush of customers is moving through the shop, the women who have slipped away from their households for a quick purchase before dinner. You've been standing for 8 hours, which is approximately how long it takes for your feet to stop having feelings and start simply being things attached to the bottoms of your legs. The cramp has moved through its afternoon peak and is settling into the duller, lower phase that usually means the worst is over for the day. Tomorrow will be different, but comparable. Day 2 is usually slightly easier physically and considerably harder in terms of the amount of laundry-related management required. The clock reads 5:15, 3/4 of an hour. You're going to make it today. You always make it. But it helps to know you're going to, not in theory but in practice, to have counted down the actual minutes and arrived at a number small enough to feel final. A woman comes in with a child, maybe 8 years old, and the child is fascinated by the bolts of fabric, keeps reaching out to touch things, and the mother is half apologetic and half absent in that way mothers get at the end of a long day. And you show the child the silk samples, the ones kept at the end of the counter specifically for touching, the ones so old and handled that another finger won't hurt them. The child touches the silk and her eyes go wide in that way that still gets to you, even after 4 years. That specific wonder at something genuinely beautiful in the middle of an ordinary day. "What's this one?" the child asks. "Dupioni," you say, "made in Italy. Feel how stiff it is." She feels how stiff it is. She turns to her mother with the universal expression of small children who have discovered something excellent. "You have to feel this." The mother comes over and she feels the silk, and there's a half-second where all 3 of you are just there together, in the small act of touching something beautiful, and the cramp doesn't exist, and the 10 hours don't exist, and there's nothing but the silk. Then the mother checks the price and decides she'll come back another time, and you smile and tell her you'll be here, and they leave. You will be here. You're always here. This is your place in the world, this 12 feet of counter, these bolts of fabric, this measured professional voice. For now, at least. 5:45. Mr. Pierce makes his end-of-day round. The shut-up procedure begins, fabric being re-rolled, samples being straightened, the counter wiped down with the damp cloth kept under the till. You do your section automatically, your hands moving through the end-of-day routine while your mind has already left, is already back at the lodging house, is already in the kitchen with the basin of cold water. "Miss Marsh," Mr. Pierce, at the end of the counter, "you're looking pale." This is unusual. Mr. Pierce does not typically comment on the appearances of his counter assistants except in the context of corrections. "It's been a long day," you say. He looks at you. His face is doing the thing it does, that complicated, uncomfortable averaging of concern and disapproval, and the desire not to engage with anything that falls outside the remit of his official authority, which is the management of the shop floor, and does not extend to the physiology of his female staff. "It has," he says, and moves on. This is in its way a kindness, not a big one, but it's what he has to offer, and he's offered it. 6:00. The door is bolted. Your coat and scarf are retrieved from the hook. Agnes is beside you at the mirror, pinning her hat, and she catches your eye in the glass. "All right?" she asks. "Fine," you say. "You did well today." She says it without fanfare, without fuss. The way she says everything. It's the language of the counter. "Thank you," you say. You mean it. The walk home is different from the walk in. The morning walk was forward motion, the body moving towards something, the day unbegun and therefore technically still manageable. The evening walk is the body moving through the end of things, gravity and fatigue and the specific weariness of 8 hours of performed wellness. Oxford Street at 6 in the evening is a different creature from Oxford Street at 6:30 in the morning. It's full, for one thing. Really full. The pavement's thick with people flowing in both directions. The omnibuses and hansom cabs and the occasional private carriage, all fighting for position in the road. The gas lamps now lit and throwing yellow circles onto the pavement that don't quite reach the gaps in between. You navigate by instinct. By 4 years of this route, your feet finding the path without consulting your brain, which is occupied with the smaller immediate calculation of how quickly you can get home and how cold the water in the basin will be. Cold enough. It's always cold enough for this purpose. There's a woman you pass every evening on the corner of Marylebone Lane. old, sitting on an upturned crate selling evening newspapers. You've never bought one because you don't have the penny to spare most evenings, but you know her face and she knows yours, and there's a nod exchanged. This is the texture of London, the web of unspoken daily acknowledgement that constitutes community when community can't afford time for anything more. Your feet hurt the way they always hurt after a long shift. You've had the same pair of boots for 2 years now, good boots originally, bought at considerable sacrifice from a shop on the high street, and they've been resoled once, and the uppers are softening in ways that are either the leather conforming to your feet or the leather giving up. The left boot, the one with the questionable sole, creates a specific friction at the ball of the foot that you'll feel tonight lying in bed. But you're walking, you're going home, and the cramp, which has been your companion for 11 hours now, has shifted down into the duller, persistent ache of a body that has done what it needed to do and is now simply tired. The lodging house smells of cabbage and coal when you let yourself in, which it always smells of, which at this point is the smell of home. You hang your coat and scarf on the hook in the hall and go straight upstairs to your room before taking off your boots, because the kitchen might have Mrs. Brandt or Mr. Hennessy or any of the other lodgers in it, and what you need before anything else is privacy. The room is cold. Maud is home, sitting on the edge of her bed reading a paper-covered novel, with the particular absorption of someone who's been inside this story since they sat down. She looks up when you come in. Long day? The usual? She looks at you with a quick assessment of a younger sister who has learned to read the specific vocabulary of your face. "I've got your water on the range," she says. "Put it on an hour ago when I got in." This is not something you asked her to do. It's something she figured out herself some months ago, when she figured out a great many other things that you've been putting off explaining because the explanation itself felt like a weight to transfer. She's 17 and she works 50 hours a week at the milliner's, and she put your water on the range without being asked. You look at her and feel something that doesn't have a simple name. "Thank you," you say. The basin of cold water where you soaked the flannel this morning has done its work. The water is darker now, though the cold has kept it clean enough, and you carry it carefully to the small back room at the end of the hall, the one they call the washing room, which has a drain in the floor and a tap with cold running water and nothing else. You empty the basin down the drain. You rinse it. You fetch it back. This is the laundry. Not all of it, but the beginning of it. The rinsing in cold water first, which is the rule, cold before hot, because hot sets the stain. This is information that comes from your mother and her mother, and the collective practical knowledge of a long line of women who did this exact thing in cold water, in cold rooms, and never wrote it down anywhere, because it didn't belong to the kind of knowledge that gets written down. It belongs to the knowledge that gets whispered and demonstrated and eventually simply known without the memory of being taught. In a few hours, when the house is quieter and the other lodgers are in their rooms, you'll heat water on the kitchen range and soak the flannel properly, rubbing it against itself with the carbolic soap, checking for staining, rinsing 3 times until the water runs clear. Then you'll wring it out and fold it into your clean-looking cleaning cloth and take it upstairs and hang it somewhere out of sight. The inner surface of the wardrobe door, the back of the trunk somewhere hidden, because the instruction that you received without it being stated, but that was perfectly clear, was, keep this invisible. Not because it's shameful exactly, or not only that. The specific Victorian version of this is more complicated. The shame is real, but it's also layered over with something else, which is that the mess, the evidence, the physical reality of this process is supposed to not exist in the social world. It's supposed to take place in a kind of bubble outside ordinary life, invisible and silent, and then ordinary life resumes. The woman who was dealing with this is replaced by the woman who is perfectly composed, and no connection is acknowledged between them. You think sometimes about what it costs to maintain that bubble. Not the flannel, which is cheap because it's just old cloth cut up. The other costs. The time, which is real, especially the laundry time, the careful secret management of evidence. The attention, the constant split focus of someone who is simultaneously present and monitoring. The energy, which is the most significant one, the chronic low-level drain of performing wellness while not being fully well. And you think about the women who can't maintain the bubble, who don't have access to the practical knowledge, or the materials, or the privacy. The women in the crowded court dwellings where 3 or 4 families share a single back room, where there's no somewhere out of sight to hide anything. The women who can't afford the carbolic soap or the flannel. The women who have irregular cycles because their nutrition is poor, which means the calculation is harder to do in advance. The women for whom the whole system of management breaks down not because of a failure of will or effort, but because the system was designed for conditions they don't have. You have conditions. Your lodging is small but private enough. Maud knows and helps. You earn enough for carbolic soap. You've been doing this long enough to have developed good enough management that you've never had a public incident in 4 years. These are, in the landscape of Victorian working women's lives, excellent conditions. And they're still 10 hours on your feet with a cramp and a flannel pinned to the inside of your drawers with safety pins and a basin of cold water waiting for you in the evening. Think about that. You change out of your work dress in the cold room. You hang the dress on its hook and put on the older cotton dress you wear around the lodging. You sit on the edge of your bed, just for a moment, just because you can. The relief of sitting down after 10 hours standing is one of those pleasures so enormous that it's almost past pleasure into something physical. The body sighing at a cellular level. You close your eyes. You breathe. Maud has gone quiet across the room, either asleep or deeply back in her novel. From downstairs the sound of the kitchen, Mrs. Brant starting her evening meal, the clatter of pots, the smell of boiled mutton beginning its slow spread through the building. Your stomach reminds you that you've been awake since 5:30 and eaten bread at 6 and lunch at noon and nothing since. You'll go down to the kitchen later for your own supper. Tonight it's the bread and dripping again, and tea, and if the range is still hot after Mrs. Brant, you'll heat your washing water at the same time. This is the evening routine. Clean, eat, prepare for tomorrow, sleep, start again. But first you need to stay very still for a few more minutes, which you do. Outside your small window, October London is doing what October London does, continuing. The constant sound of hooves and wheels on the street below, somebody's piano from the house across the court, the distant calling of a paper boy with the evening edition, his voice cutting up through the gathering dark. The smell of coal smoke strengthening as every chimney in the neighbourhood adds its contribution to the joint endeavour of keeping London warm. You've been in this city for 4 years. Before that you were in Whitechapel, where you were born, which is technically also this city, but is a different country from Oxford Street in every meaningful way. Before that you were in the life that existed while your mother was alive, which feels now like a different geological era, something older than all the rest. But right now, in this cold room, in this lodging house, in this body that has been carrying you through 10 hours of professional visibility on 4 safety pins, and a warm stone bottle. You're here, present, accounted for. You've earned tonight. Now let's talk about what else you couldn't do. Because the shop floor is one thing, but the shop floor is only 10 hours of a very long day, and the constraints of the menstrual week in 1876 extended far beyond the working hours into every other corner of a woman's life. The bath is the one you hear about most often from the medical literature, and it's the one that seems most absurd from the distance of a century and a half. The Victorian medical consensus, stated firmly and with great confidence, was that women should not take baths during menstruation. Not warm baths, not cold baths, no immersion of the body in water. The reasoning, as stated by the authorities, immersion in water during the menstrual period would cause the flow to stop suddenly, which would result in the blood being reabsorbed into the system, which would cause a range of terrible consequences, including but not limited to permanent reproductive damage, hysteria, fever, and in extreme cases, death. None of this is true. None of it has any biological basis. The flow does not stop during bathing in any meaningful way, and even if brief changes in flow occurred, reabsorption of this kind does not happen in the way the doctors described. But the belief was sincere, and it was repeated in medical textbooks, and it was passed from doctor to patient, and from patient to daughter, and from household to household, and it was used to justify the rule that you grew up with: no bath this week. The practical consequence of this, in a household without running hot water, where a bath required the carrying of multiple buckets of hot water to a tin tub, and was therefore not an everyday occurrence but a weekly event, was not as dramatic as it might sound in a modern context. But even so, even allowing for the Victorian relationship with bathing, which was considerably less frequent than the modern one, there is still a meaningful difference between washing at a basin and immersing yourself in warm water, and the specific denial of that warmth, that comfort, in the week when your body most wanted it, had its own particular texture. You wash at the basin then. You wash carefully, thoroughly, with the soap and the cold water and the clean cloth. This is what you have, and it is enough, or it will have to be. There are other things. The prohibition on vigorous exercise is one of them. Not just don't overwork yourself, but a specific prohibition on exercise as a category. Running, jumping, anything that raised the heart rate significantly. The reasoning here was similar. Increased circulation would either increase the flow to dangerous levels or interfere with the proper process in some way that would cause lasting harm. The practical consequence of this, again, depends enormously on which Eleanor you are. For Lady Eleanor, it meant cancelling the morning horseback ride. For counter-assistant Eleanor, it meant nothing at all, because she doesn't ride horses, and her daily physical activity is so thoroughly dominated by the shop floor that vigorous exercise as a separate category simply doesn't exist in her life. There was also the education prohibition. Dr. Maudsley's argument, which you've read about second-hand through Agnes Pierce's pamphlet collection, was that this applied specifically to examination periods, to the sustained intellectual effort of academic study. But in practice, the logic extended to anything demanding, taxing reading, anything requiring sustained concentration. The brain, during the menstrual week, was supposed to be given nothing difficult to do. You find this one particularly interesting, standing at your counter in Oxford Street. Because what you do for 10 hours a day, 5.5 days a week, requires constant memory, arithmetic, professional judgment, the management of interpersonal dynamics, and precise knowledge of your entire stock. You do this today with a cramp and a stone bottle and 4 safety pins and the particular focus that comes from having no alternative. If Dr. Maudsley were watching you, he would be concerned. He would probably tell your employer that you should be sent home. Your employer would not know what to do with this information. Your employer has a floor to run. The employment question is actually the one that has the most teeth, in practical terms, not the rules about bathing and exercise, which are annoyances. The question of employment. Several occupations in 1876 formally or informally restricted the hiring or working of women during the menstrual period. Female telegraph operators, female typesetters, female teachers in certain establishments, not uniformly, not with legal force, but through the persistent low-level belief embedded in employment practices that a woman's monthly incapacity made her less reliable than a man over the course of a month. The arithmetic was always the same. A woman might be unwell for 4 to 7 days out of every 28. A man would not have this predictable absence from full efficiency. Therefore the man was more reliable. Therefore the man was preferable, all other things being equal. This argument was used against women in nearly every professional context throughout the 19th century. It was used explicitly in the debates about women's suffrage. A woman whose health was compromised 12 weeks out of every year could not be trusted to exercise the same consistent political judgment as a man. It was used against women in medicine. Could a female physician be trusted to perform surgery during her period when her faculties were compromised? Elizabeth Garrett Anderson's response to this particular argument was, in substance, that she was more concerned about the state of the male physicians she'd observed, who were dealing with their own health crises, including gout, drink, and general exhaustion from the kind of dissipation that Victorian professional life encouraged, than she was about the supposed monthly vulnerability of her female colleagues. She made this point quietly, professionally, without the anger that would have been appropriate, because the anger would have been used against her. This is the other thing about being a Victorian woman doing Victorian medicine in Victorian London. You could be right and angry, or you could be right and effective, very rarely both. You're not Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, you're Eleanor Marsh, and you're sitting on the edge of your bed in a cold room, and your feet hurt, and the cramp has settled into the persistent low throb that will be there tomorrow morning when you wake up and do the calculation all over again. But you are also a woman who has been doing something extraordinary for 11 hours, something that the medical authorities of your time would look at and say should not be happening, something that the social authorities would look at and say you should be exempted from, something that your body, on its more difficult days, might agree with. You're doing it anyway. You're doing it in the company of Agnes Pierce, who leaves you safety pins without discussion, in the company of the woman at the counter who touched the silk dupioni and had that half-second of pure experience, in the company of Maud, who put the water on the range without being asked, in the company of the thousands of other Eleanors in this city, on this same October evening, who are dealing with exactly this, and are doing it without ceremony or complaint, because ceremony and complaint are luxuries that have not been offered. This is its own kind of extraordinary. It doesn't feel extraordinary, it just feels like Tuesday. There is a chemist on the ground floor 2 streets from your lodging house, a small dark shop with jars of coloured water in the window, and a smell that hits you from 20 feet away. Camphor and carbolic and something sweet and chemical underneath, the smell of composed remedies. You've been going to this chemist for 3 years. His name is Mr. Farrow. He has a grey moustache and bifocals, and he knows his trade. You go there on the second evening, not the first. The first evening you manage with the stone bottle and Maud's company and your own stubbornness. The second evening the cramp returns in the afternoon version, the building kind. And by the time you're done with the shop floor, you're carrying a pain behind your lower abdomen that is specifically, decisively real. Not the kind of thing that yields to breathing through it. The chemist's shop is just closing when you get there. Mr. Farrow sees you through the window and waits. Miss Marsh. He knows your name because this is a small neighbourhood chemist, and small neighbourhood chemists know their regulars, and being a regular in this context means something specific. Means that you have been coming in at approximately predictable intervals with a specific need. He doesn't make you explain. He reaches under the counter while you're still unwinding your scarf and produces a small brown bottle. The Beecham's pills, not opium-based, which is one of the reasons you prefer them to the tinctures. Marketed for female complaints and disordered functions, which is the Victorian way of saying they're sold specifically to women for this specific purpose. They contain aloe, ginger, and a handful of other things. They work about as well as a moderate dose of something with actual biological effect, which is to say, better than nothing, worse than what you'd have access to in a century. Please, you say. He wraps them in a paper bag. You pay twopence. He pauses before handing them over, and this is the moment you're always slightly braced for, the moment when the transaction tips from commercial into something else. Bad month? He asks. This is not an impertinent question from Mr. Farrow, or rather, it would be impertinent from anyone else. But Mr. Farrow is 63 years old, and has been a chemist in this neighbourhood for 30 years, and has daughters, and has had a wife who is a great believer in discussing things plainly, and he occupies a specific category of safe male presence. He's not going to do anything with the information. He's not going to tell anyone. He's asking in the way a doctor asks about pain, to understand what's needed. Average, you say, which is true. He nods. Keep warm tonight, he says. The Beecham's on a full stomach, and I've got some new flannel cord in if you need it. 2p a yard. This is the other thing Mr. Farrow knows, which is that flannel cord is not exclusively used for trimming garments. I'm all right for now, you say. Thank you. He gives you the pills, and you leave, and the night outside is cold, and the gas lamps are hazing in the October damp, and you walk the 2 streets home with the paper bag in your coat pocket. This is what the women's world looks like from the inside. Not the dramatic version, not the pamphlets and the marches and the great arguments about suffrage and education, though those are real and important and Agnes Pearce reads about them. The day-to-day version. The version that runs in parallel to all the official history without being recorded by it, because it's conducted in low voices in back rooms and across shop counters, and in the language of nods and small practical transactions and the question, "Are you all right?" asked in a voice pitched so that only the intended person hears. There is a network. You've come to understand this over 4 years in this city, working this floor, living in this lodging house. Not a formal network, not one with meetings or officers or a declaration of intent, just the accumulated effect of women knowing things and passing those things to other women. The safety pins under the price sheets, the Beecham's, Mr. Farrow knowing to ask. The way Agnes watches the floor and covers the gaps without being asked. Knowledge moving through the city the way blood moves through a body, without ceremony, without a map, simply finding its way to where it's needed. You think about your mother again, which happens more often this week than other weeks. which you have stopped trying to explain and simply accept as a feature of the particular landscape this week occupies in your emotional geography. Your mother, who died of pneumonia when you were 19 and Maud was 13, and who is present for you most specifically in the practical knowledge she passed on, because that is mostly what she had to leave you. The flannel strips, the cold water before hot, the calendar she kept, just dates, small marks in the corner of the kitchen calendar, which you kept doing after she died because keeping it made you feel less alone in the counting. She showed you the calendar when you were 15 and told you to mark the dates, and you've been marking them ever since. Different calendars, the same system. She told you about the cold water and the carbolic soap and the pinning with safety pins. She told you not to lift heavy things the first 2 days, which in the context of your actual life was not always possible to follow, but was advice she gave regardless, with the genuine belief that it would help. She didn't tell you about the penny dispensary doctor. She didn't tell you about the medical theories. She didn't tell you what Maudsley wrote about women's universities, because she'd never heard of Maudsley and didn't have occasion to read his papers. She didn't tell you about the Seats for Shop Assistants Act that would pass in 23 years, because it hadn't passed yet and she'd have had no way of knowing it was coming. She told you what she knew. She told you the things that would get you through. It occurs to you, lying on your bed in the cold room with the October dark outside the window and the Beechams sitting on your stomach taking approximately 20 minutes to do anything, that this is also a kind of medicine. The specific practical woman-to-woman transmission of what works, not the official medicine, the dispensary medicine, the Maudsley medicine, the other kind. Women have been doing this for as long as they've been dealing with this. Long before 1876, long before dispensary doctors and menstrual debility theories, and the question of whether women should be allowed to take university examinations. Long before any of the frameworks that the Victorians put around this process, since the beginning. The knowledge has always moved. It's always found its way. Maud is asleep across the room, breathing slow and even, her novel face down on the mattress, the candle already out. She fell asleep reading, which is her version of the short nights and long shifts, the body deciding it's done and checking out without ceremony. Outside, the neighbourhood is settling toward its later night sounds. The pubs will be open for another few hours yet. Down the street there's a gin shop that's open later still, that particular category of nighttime commerce that you've walked past many times and never entered, which is not primarily because of any moral position, but because the penny spent there is a penny not spent on tea or bread. The Beechams are starting to work. The cramp is not gone, but it's quieter, the edge taken off it, which is enough to let the rest of your body notice how tired it is. You think about tomorrow. Tomorrow is Wednesday. Day 2, which will be heavier than today and require more careful management in the morning, which means waking earlier, which means less sleep. The shop opens at 8. Mr. Pierce will make his pre-opening round. The customers will come in their waves. The clock will move through its 10 hours. You'll stand. You'll sell fabric. You'll be professional and composed and entirely fine. You'll pin 4 strips of flannel to the inside of your drawers with safety pins, and you'll carry the warm stone bottle in your pocket, and you'll check Agnes's bottom drawer, and Agnes will know without being told what state you're in, and between the two of you and the small daily machinery of women who know what women need, you'll get through the day. This is not heroism. You wouldn't call it that. It's just what Tuesday and Wednesday look like when you're a woman in 1876, working a long shift in a draper's shop on Oxford Street, doing the calculation that starts before you open your eyes. It's just life. But here's the thing about life. And this is the thing that I want you to hold before we drift into the deeper part of the evening. Here's the thing about Tuesday in October 1876, about Eleanor and Agnes and Mr. Farrow and the warm water that Maud put on the range. Nobody writes this down. Not the flannel and the pins, not the stone bottle in the dress pocket, not the bottom drawer with the safety pins, not the nod that means I know what today is. None of it. It doesn't appear in the newspapers or the medical journals or the parliamentary debates or the histories that will be written about this period. It doesn't appear in the novels, mostly because the novels are concerned with other things. It happens in the same parallel world as almost everything that women did to keep themselves functioning, keep their families functioning, keep the great machinery of Victorian domestic and commercial life functioning without anyone recording it. It happens, and then it stops happening, and then it happens again the following month and continues to happen until it stops for other reasons. And somewhere in the middle of all the happening is the entire texture of a life. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. The cramp is quiet now. The stone bottle has gone cold. The room is very dark except for the window, which lets in the dim orange-grey of London's night. The sky that never goes fully black because there are too many gas lamps and too many fires for the dark to get a proper hold. Tomorrow there will be the 8 o'clock opening and the 12 yards of merino and the customer who can never find exactly the right shade of anything, and the clock that moves through its 10 hours. Tomorrow the pins will need checking, and the calculation will need doing, and the body will be asked to perform its excellent impersonation of a body that is entirely fine. But that's tomorrow. Right now, in this moment, you're here. Let me tell you what else she couldn't do. Not today, not specifically on this October Tuesday, but across the whole architecture of her life as a Victorian woman in this period. Because the shop floor and the flannel and the stone bottle are the daily machinery, and they matter, but they sit inside a larger structure, and the larger structure is its own kind of weight. Eleanor Marsh cannot vote. This is, in 1876, a settled fact that is beginning to be very energetically unsettled by a growing number of women who are making extremely good arguments and being largely ignored. The Married Women's Property Act won't pass until 1882, 6 years from now, meaning that if Eleanor were to marry, everything she owns, including her wages, would legally become her husband's property. Not because she's incompetent, because she's a woman, and the law was written without reference to whether women are competent. She cannot, if she were to commit a crime, be tried by a jury that includes women, because women are not eligible for jury service. She cannot attend most universities, not because she isn't intelligent enough, but because the gates are literally closed. When Newnham College at Cambridge opened 4 years ago in 1872, the women who attended were not permitted to take the degree examinations. They could study, they could attend lectures, they could be examined informally. They could not hold a degree. She cannot hold a medical license except for the narrow path that Elizabeth Garrett Anderson fought through the Society of Apothecaries, which the society then immediately closed behind her so no other woman could follow the same route. She cannot, if she's clever and ambitious and determined, easily find a professional outlet for any of that cleverness and ambition and determination that doesn't involve doing it in the face of formal and informal obstruction from institutions that consider her presence in them inappropriate, disruptive, or dangerous. She cannot, if she marries, easily divorce. The Matrimonial Causes Act of 1857 allows divorce, but the grounds are different for men and women. A husband needs to prove adultery. A wife needs to prove adultery plus something else, cruelty, or desertion, or incest. because the argument, made seriously, was that adultery was more damaging to a wife than to a husband, and therefore the grounds needed to be more severe to justify breaking the marriage bond. She cannot, at certain points in her working life, entirely control her own medical decisions, because the medical framework surrounding her treats her as a patient rather than an agent. All of this stacks. That's the thing that's important to understand, the thing that doesn't fit into a simple summary. It doesn't come one thing at a time. It comes all at once, always, simultaneously. The monthly week that is medically categorized as a period of incapacity sits inside a professional life that will always pay her less than the equivalent man, which sits inside a social world that expects her to maintain perfect composure about all of it, which sits inside a legal framework that doesn't reliably have her interests in view, and inside all of that today, the safety pins, the stone bottle, the 10 hours on her feet, Agnes Pearce's nod. Here is what strikes me, looking at this from the distance of 150 years. The extraordinary thing is not that Victorian women found all of this difficult. The extraordinary thing is how thoroughly and completely they managed it, how entirely they maintained the performance of capability, how the shop floors kept running and the households kept functioning and the children kept being raised and the seamstresses kept sewing and the laundry maids kept laundering and the entire edifice of Victorian life kept operating, week after week, month after month, on the labour of people who were, according to the medical authorities of the day, in a state of temporary physiological crisis for roughly 1 week in 4. The maths on this, if you care to do them, are interesting. 1 week in 4, roughly 13 weeks per year, a working life from 15 to perhaps 50, say 35 years. That's approximately 455 weeks of the menstrual week over a working lifetime, in an era when the official prescription for those weeks was rest, and the practical reality of those weeks was keep going. 455 weeks of the calculation. 455 times of waking up and knowing before you open your eyes. 455 of the stone bottle and the flannel and the cold water in the basin and the walk to work that helps the cramp. All of it invisible. All of it conducted in the parallel world, the subterranean network of knowing. You are one small part of an enormous, continuous, unreported story. But here's where the evening takes you if you let it. Here's where Tuesday in October 1876 opens up into something wider. Agnes Pearce reads pamphlets. She knows about the campaign for women's suffrage, which has been going since 1866, when the first petition was presented to Parliament. She knows about Elizabeth Garrett Anderson's dispensary in Marylebone. She knows about the campaign for female university education. She knows about the work being done by women like Josephine Butler, who has been fighting the Contagious Diseases Acts, which gave police the power to arrest and forcibly examine women they suspected of prostitution, and which Butler argues are not just immoral, but a specific kind of assault on women's bodily autonomy. Butler's campaign is notable partly for its content and partly for the way she conducts it. She talks, in public, about women's bodies and women's experiences in language that the Victorians consider inappropriately frank. She is criticised for this. The criticism does not stop her. She has been doing this for nearly a decade, and she will continue for another decade, and her campaign will eventually result in the repeal of the Acts in 1886. What Agnes knows, what she reads about in pamphlets and discusses in low voices in the luncheon room, is that these things are connected. The seat behind the counter and the right to vote. The flannel and the medical authority, the stone bottle and the university examination, they're all part of the same argument, which is that women are capable people whose capabilities have been systematically discounted by a framework that benefits from the discounting. This is not a complicated argument. It's been made many times, clearly and with abundant evidence. It keeps being made. It keeps being partly accepted and mostly deferred. Eventually, Agnes says, these things take eventually. You believe her, in the abstract, the way you believe things that seem obviously true but are located at a temporal distance you can't quite see across. You believe the seat will come in eventually years, the vote in eventually years, the right to a degree in eventually years. What eventually doesn't give you is help today. And today is today, Tuesday. The flannel and the pins and the walk home and the Beechams and the cold room. But let's stay with Agnes for a moment, because Agnes Pearce is interesting, and she is one of the people in this story who knows something about its larger shape. Agnes is 31. She was born in 1845. She's been at Pemberton since she was 22, which means she arrived at the shop in 1867, which was the year after the first women's suffrage petition was presented to Parliament. She has been at Pemberton's for 9 years now. She will stay at Pemberton's for 11 more. She will never marry, not because she couldn't, but because she made the decision at some point in her mid-20s that she didn't want the legal consequences of it. She will read about the Married Women's Property Act when it passes in 1882, and she will feel confirmed. Agnes is not a woman of dramatic gestures. She doesn't march, though she approves of marching. She doesn't write pamphlets, though she reads them. She leaves safety pins in the bottom drawer and covers for the women beside her when they need covering, and talks in the luncheon room in low voices about things that matter. This is, in its quiet way, also a form of the larger argument. The safety pins are a form of the argument. The nod that means I know what today is, that nod is a form of the argument. The argument that women's bodies and women's experiences are worth attending to. Worth the 4 minutes in the dispensary and the Seats Act and the medical research that doesn't treat menstruation as pathological vulnerability, but as a normal physiological process. Worth the simple, practical accommodations of not requiring women to stand for 10 hours without relief when standing for 10 hours is particularly difficult for perfectly ordinary biological reasons. Worth noticing at all. That's the thing the Victorians fundamentally couldn't quite get to, the noticing, the acknowledgement that this exists, that it has a real impact on real women's lives, that those women deserve real accommodations for it. Every time the subject came close to the surface, the response was either to medicalize it out of the ordinary world, to make it an illness that therefore required quarantine and rest and removal from normal life, or to simply not notice it at all, to treat the women managing it invisibly as evidence that it needed no management. The women managing it were managing it. The evidence that no management was needed was the proof of exactly how much management was needed. Agnes knows this. She's been managing it for 16 years. She's been managing it for 9 years on this counter floor. She's been watching other women manage it, covering for them when they needed covering, leaving safety pins in the bottom drawer. She doesn't find this dramatic. She finds it Tuesday. You look at her, across the counter, in the moments between customers. She's 61 years old in your head tonight, in the imagined future where Agnes becomes the Agnes she's going to be, the Agnes who will read about the Seats Act passing in 1899 and nod in her particular way, confirming evidence for what she already knew. You're 22. You have 9 years before the seat. You have 30 years before the vote. You have 400 and something more weeks of the calculation. But you have Agnes. You have the safety pins. You have Maud, who put the water on the range. You have Mr. Farrow, who knows to ask. You have your mother's calendar, still marking the dates in the top corner of the kitchen almanac you bought for a penny at the beginning of the year. This is your inheritance, not the kind that goes in a will, the other kind. The city outside your window is doing its 10,000 things, and the night is coming down over the rooftops and the chimneys, and the cramp is quiet now, and you are here. Let's go wider now. Let's pull back from this one room in this one lodging house and look at the full picture, because the full picture is enormous and strange, and it doesn't get told often enough. This is not only Eleanor Marsh's story. Eleanor Marsh is your entry point, the specific thread through which we came in. But what she's experiencing tonight in this cold room, with the cramp quieting and the dark settling, and Maud asleep across the room, what she's experiencing is one point in a vast, continuous, unreported human experience. Every woman in London tonight who's in her menstrual week is doing some version of this. The calculation, the management, the performance of being entirely fine. That's, conservatively, somewhere between 80 and 100,000 women on any given day in 1876 London, out of a population of approximately 4 million, 1 week in 4. At any given point in time, 25% of the female population between approximately 15 and 50 is in some phase of this. These are not dramatic numbers, they're just arithmetic. The arithmetic of biological reality meeting social structure and producing the peculiar invisible labour of the menstrual week. Some of those 100,000 women are in exactly the position you're imagining for Lady Eleanor, the one who can cancel her appointments and rest in her sitting room. A small fraction, genuinely small. The ability to rest without consequences is a luxury, and luxury in 1876 London was not widespread. The majority are doing some version of what counter-assistant Eleanor is doing, or what the laundry maid is doing, or what the seamstress is doing, bent over her work at a piece-rate table in a room with inadequate light, doing the mental arithmetic of how many buttons will she sew tonight, and will it cover Friday's rent, with the cramp a steady companion to the calculation. Some of them are doing something harder. The women in the worst-off neighbourhoods, the courts and rookeries of Seven Dials and the East End, where the poverty is of a particular kind, the kind that means the practical management tools are not reliably available, where the flannel might not be available, where it might be a piece of anything, any rag that comes to hand. Changed less often than ideal because clean rags are limited and the water for washing them costs effort and fuel, where the cold water rinsing might not happen because there's no private place to do it. These women exist. They are not written about. They are managing something real with inadequate tools in inadequate conditions, and they are doing it with no accommodation from the world around them, which does not acknowledge that they are doing it. And some of them are in the other kind of difficulty. Not poverty difficulty, but the difficulty that comes from the cycle going wrong. From the thing the dispensary doctor called menstrual debility in its real forms, the genuine disruption. Endometriosis, though that term doesn't exist yet and won't be named for another 20 years. Fibroids, extreme dysmenorrhea. The conditions that make the calculation not a matter of safety pins and stone bottles, but a matter of whether the day is functionally possible at all. These women are told that their problem is their nervous constitution, that they need rest and beef tea and possibly marriage, that if the pain is severe enough, they can have the laudanum tincture, and if the laudanum tincture isn't enough, there is always chloroform, and if the chloroform isn't enough, there are various surgical options that the Victorian medical establishment pursues with a level of enthusiasm that is not always proportionate to the evidence for their efficacy. Surgical options including in this period the removal of the ovaries for the treatment of ovarian irritation, which is a term that covered a wide range of conditions, many of which had nothing to do with the ovaries. The operation, oophorectomy, performed without general anaesthetic in the early part of the century, and with chloroform by 1876, was considered by some surgeons to be a cure for everything from dysmenorrhea to hysteria to nymphomania. The patient were often not fully informed about what was being done to her. This is in 1876, not in the Dark Ages, in the year of our story, in the same city where Elizabeth Garrett Anderson is building her dispensary for women and children and trying to create a framework for treating women as patients who deserve to know what is happening to their bodies. She is one woman. The other kind of doctor is many. You're not thinking about this tonight. You are in your cold room, and your Beechams are working, and you are thinking about tomorrow's shift and the water for the laundry, and whether the left boot will last another month. But it's there. It's all there. The entire context, the weight of it, surrounding your particular Tuesday like a sea surrounds an island. The island is specific and solid. The sea is everything else. Here is what you know, lying in your cold room in October 1876, that is genuinely and precisely true. Your body is doing something that about half the human population does at some point in their lives, for a significant fraction of their years, at great cost to their comfort and in the face of cultural silence and occasionally active social punishment, for acknowledging it exists, and you are managing it, quietly, competently, largely without complaint, as women have been managing it for as long as women have been managing things. And somewhere in this city tonight, a woman named Elizabeth Garrett Anderson is finishing her evening at the dispensary on Marylebone Road, treating patients who need exactly the kind of treating she gives them, which is to say, treatment that takes them seriously, that sees their bodies as bodies worth understanding, that doesn't preemptively classify their experiences as evidence of weakness. She'll go home, she'll sleep, she'll be back at the dispensary tomorrow, the next day and the day after that. She's building something with great patience and against great resistance that will eventually be the world in which Eleanor Marsh's granddaughter will walk into a chemist and buy ibuprofen without explanation and take it on an empty stomach and be mildly inconvenienced by the cramps for a few hours and otherwise get on with her day. That is 100 years away. It is coming. It is already in 1876 being argued into existence by women like Elizabeth Garrett Anderson and Josephine Butler and the women who signed the 50,000 names on the petition for women's suffrage. But it is not here yet. What's here is the stone bottle gone cold, the flannel soaking in the basin, the October dark, the church bell somewhere marking 10 o'clock. Maud is asleep. The cramp is quiet. Outside the window, London is settling into its late-night version of itself, still loud, but differently loud. The daytime commerce giving way to the nighttime variety. The pubs going strong. The gin shops. The later carts. The nightmen who come to collect the contents of the privies, which is work so unpleasant that it has to happen in the dark and be finished before the city fully wakes. The link boys, lighting the way for people with the money to pay for light. The beggars in the doorways, finding whatever warmth the city leaves out for them, which is not much. You've been in this city 4 years. You know its sounds. You know its smells. You know the way it moves. But you don't know the half of it. Not really. You know Oxford Street and the back streets you walk between the lodging house and the shop. You know the chemist and the grocer and the woman selling evening newspapers. You know your 12 feet of counter and the 4 years of fabric knowledge it contains. You don't know the Marylebone dispensary. You haven't been to the public lectures that are beginning to be given cautiously to women's audiences about physiology and women's health. The lectures that Elizabeth Garrett Anderson gives at the London School of Medicine for Women, that she helped found in 1874. You haven't read the small pamphlets that circulate about women's rights and women's health, the ones Agnes reads. But you know the safety pins. You know the cold water before hot. You know the calendar, the small marks in the top corner. You know what it costs monthly to be this well managed. That's a kind of knowledge too. The city makes its night sounds. The clock ticks on the landing. Your feet are warm now, finally warm, wrapped in the blanket. The ache in your soles retreat into a background murmur. Tomorrow is Wednesday. Wednesday will begin the way Tuesday began. The calculation before you open your eyes, the grey October light, the smell of coal dust and the specific iron-tinged smell. That is the smell of your particular Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. The smell that is invisible to everyone but you and those who know to look. Wednesday will require more careful management in the morning. Day 2 is heavier, and you know it. You've set out the things you need on the dresser top, the flannel strips, folded, the safety pins, the small piece of flannel cloth wrapped around the empty stone bottle, which you'll fill from the kettle before you leave tomorrow. Wednesday will have Mr. Pearson his pre-opening round and his 8 o'clock look at the clock. It will have Agnes Pearce, who will already know from the morning assessment exactly what kind of day it is. It will have customers, the usual array, the ones who know what they want and the ones who don't, the ones who are entirely pleasant and the ones who make the 10 hours longer than they technically need to be. Wednesday will end the way Tuesday ended. The coat and scarf, the walk home, the cold room, the basin of water. This is the shape of the menstrual week in 1876. Not catastrophe, not rest, just the shape of a working life, accommodated quietly, managed practically, conducted in the parallel world of women's knowledge, invisible to the official record and completely ordinary to everyone who lives inside it. Not heroic, just Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, until it's done, and then the calendar, the small mark in the corner, approximately 24 days until the calculation starts again. Count them carefully. They go fast. Wednesday morning arrives exactly the way you knew it would. Your eyes open to grey light, and you know before you're fully conscious, know in the body's own particular language of pressure and weight, and a heat at the base of your spine that today is going to require everything you have. Maud is still asleep. The room smells of cold and coal, and the faint metallic underlay that you've stopped noticing the way you stop noticing the smell of your own hair. You lie still for 30 seconds, not out of luxury or indecision, out of the specific economy of a body that knows it has a long day ahead and is using the dark to gather itself. The cramp is already present, low and insistent, a different quality from yesterday's. Yesterday was a warning almost. Today is the fact itself. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It's simply there, a steady compression, like a hand closing slowly around the lower abdomen, tightening and releasing on its own schedule. You get up. The flannel strips on the dresser, the safety pins, the kettle you filled last night, cold now but you'll heat it. You move through the morning routine that you know so well it could happen without you. Your hands finding the buttons, your feet finding the cold floor, your face finding the expression that it wears for the day. Maud wakes when you're halfway through lacing the corset. "I'll do the back," she says, still half asleep, sliding out of bed without ceremony and coming to stand behind you. You don't argue. Maud does the lacing with the particular competence of someone who's been doing it for months, who has learned, without being explicitly taught, how to read the difference between the tension appropriate for a difficult morning and the tension appropriate for a normal one. Today, she leaves a little more room than usual. A ½ inch. Just enough. "Thank you," you say. She goes back to bed. The stone bottle, filled from the kitchen kettle, tucked into the dress pocket where it sits against your hip, a small portable warmth, the coat, the scarf, the bread, eaten standing in the kitchen before anyone else is awake, with the particular mechanical efficiency of someone fueling a machine before a long operation, and then outside, and the October morning, and the walk. You have noticed, over the years, that the walk to work on a heavy day has a different quality from the walk on a light one. Not slower, necessarily. You don't let yourself be slower, because being late is not a variable you're willing to introduce into an already complicated situation, but differently aware. Walking with the slightly heightened attention to the body that comes from knowing you're going to need it to do a lot today. The October street is grey and damp. Last night's rain has left the cobblestones slick and the gutters running with a brown trickle that is water mixed with whatever the city deposits into its gutters, which you have trained yourself not to think too specifically about. A horse cart is making a delivery to the greengrocer on the corner, and the smell of the horse is one of those full animal smells that you've become accustomed to, in the way that everyone who lives in a city of horse-drawn transport becomes accustomed to it, which is to say it's simply part of the air. The horse's breath steams in the cold. Its hooves are enormous on the wet stone. The walk helps. It always helps. By the time you reach Oxford Street, the cramp has moved from insistent to manageable. Not gone, not quiet. Just the level at which you can work around it without it taking up the whole foreground of your attention. You know this level. You know you can work at this level. You've done it more times than you've counted. Inside Pemberton and Sons, Agnes is already at a station. She looks at you. She looks at you for about half a second. The assessment's so fast and practiced it doesn't look like an assessment. "Bottom drawer," she says. You check the bottom drawer. Extra flannel strips, folded small, tucked under the price sheets. Not just safety pins today. Agnes has been there before you and added the cloth. You feel something that is not quite gratitude and not quite solidarity, and is actually both of those things plus something older than either of them, something that doesn't have a precise modern name but that you know in the body. That particular warmth that comes from being seen and accommodated without being asked. "Thank you," you say. Agnes nods and turns back to her ribbons. The day begins. Here is Wednesday in full. Here is what it actually looks like, stripped of everything but the specific detail. You stand for 10 hours. During these 10 hours, the cramp moves through 3 distinct phases. The morning wave, which is the hardest, the mid-afternoon period, which is heavy, and the late afternoon quieter stretch, which is what you've been aiming at all day. You visit the necessary twice. Both times you repin and check and the arrangement holds. You sell cloth. You sell ribbon. You sell a particular length of printed cotton to a woman who is making curtains for a nursery, and has very decided ideas about what colour the curtain should be. Ideas that take 40 minutes to navigate towards something that actually exists. You have a long conversation with a woman who is recovering a sofa and needs to understand the relative merits of 3 different upholstery fabrics. You explain the merits. You're accurate and helpful and professionally composed. You eat your lunch in 15 minutes, standing in the luncheon room with Agnes beside you and the sound of the shop floor through the door. You drink 2 cups of tea, which you wouldn't normally do, but today the warmth is worth the penny. You eat your bread and cold meat and it helps. At 3 o'clock, you have the moment that happens on bad Wednesdays. Not a visible moment. Not a dropped fabric or a shaking hand or anything that Mr. Pierce doing his 3 o'clock round would notice. Just the internal version, the flash of something behind the eyes, the body briefly losing the thread of the performance. You breathe through it. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Your hands stay on the counter. Your face stays pleasant. It passes. It always passes. That's the thing. It always passes. At 5 o'clock, with 1 hour left, you allow yourself the knowledge that you're going to make it. Not as a triumph, just as information. You're going to make it. You've made it 80-odd times before this, and you'll make it however many times after, and it has never not worked out, and today will not be the exception. The hour passes, the clock does its 10-hour work, the floor closes, and on the walk home, on the damp October street with the gas lamps beginning their yellow glow, and the evening newspaper girl on the corner, you do something you don't usually do. You stop, briefly, on the corner of a side street that runs south off Oxford Street, because the side street opens onto a larger road that gives you for a moment a wider view. And from this small pause you can see the street stretching away from you, and beyond it other streets, and in the far distance, barely visible in the October evening haze, the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral. Wren's great dome, the thing you see from the upper omnibus sometimes, the landmark that tells you where you are in the city the way a sailor uses a lighthouse. It rises above the rooftops, grey stone and lead, enormous and certain in the uncertain evening. You've been walking past buildings all your life that were built before your parents were born. The church at the end of your street was consecrated in 1720. The market building on Marylebone Lane is older than that. The stones of this city have been here longer than anyone currently walking on them, and they will be here longer than any of the people currently walking on them, and they contain within their permanence a certain message that you receive differently on days like today. The message is, this is real. All of it. The cramping and the standing and the cost of it. The safety pins and the stone bottle and the parallel world of women's knowledge, the dispensary doctor and his 4 minutes and his theory of menstrual congestion, Agnes Pierce and her pamphlets, and her eventually. All of it is real, and it is part of the city, and the city is real, and it has been real for longer than you can imagine. And somewhere inside this reality, somewhere in the next 100 years probably, the seat behind the counter will come, and the vote, and the medical research that treats women's bodies as worth understanding rather than managing into invisibility, and the ibuprofen, the simple non-opium painkiller, the ordinary tablet that a woman will take on a busy day 100 years from now, without knowing the history of the women who didn't have it, who stood for 10 hours without it, who managed without it, because there was no alternative. That woman, 100 years from now, will not know your name. She'll take her ibuprofen and go to work and stand at a counter or sit at a desk or run her meeting or perform her surgery, and she'll be slightly uncomfortable and it'll be manageable and she'll get on with it, and she'll do it without the 4 safety pins, without the stone bottle, without the calculation that starts before she opens her eyes. And that's fine. That's good. That's what eventually looks like. You look at the dome of St. Paul's for a long moment this October Wednesday evening, and then you start walking again, because home is 20 minutes away, and you need to start the laundry. Thursday arrives. The third day is usually easier. Usually. The heavy phase is passing, the body beginning to step down from the intensity of Tuesday and Wednesday, and Thursday has a different quality, still present, still requiring management, but at a level the body handles with less acute cost. You wake on Thursday without the preemptive dread of Tuesday's morning. You wake knowing it's going to be difficult but manageable. This is a meaningful distinction. By Thursday afternoon, you're close to normal, not fully there. The particular weariness of the week is in your legs and your lower back and behind your eyes, the accumulated tiredness of 3 days of running on the parallel track while maintaining the performance of the main one. But the cramp is background now, a murmur rather than a demand. You sell 12 yards of tartan wool to a woman who's making a winter skirt for her daughter. You explain the difference between the traditional weights. You measure it out with a brass yardstick. Your hands are steady, your back is straight, your face is professional. Mr. Pierce does his round. He doesn't look at the clock when you come back from the necessary at 2:15. Either he didn't notice or he decided not to notice. Either way, you'll take it. Agnes, at the end of the day, puts the extra safety pins back in her bag. "See you tomorrow," she says. "Same as always," you say. She smiles. It's a small smile, the Agnes Pierce version of a smile, which is a slight softening of the expression and a quality of warmth in the eyes. It's enough. Friday is easier still. Friday you almost forget, for stretches of an hour at a time, that anything is particularly different from the ordinary working week. The calculation is there, but it's automated, running in the background, requiring very little conscious attention. The stone bottle is still in your pocket, but it's more habit than necessity at this point. Saturday is the last day. You know the last day by the particular lightness of it. Everything quieter. The week retreating, pulling back, the body beginning the slow return to the ordinary configuration, the one that doesn't require the extra layer of management. The flannel strips are lighter. The stone bottle is probably not necessary, but you bring it anyway, because you've learned not to be overconfident on the last day. The last day can turn around. It doesn't today. Saturday passes without incident. Saturday evening you do the last of the laundry, the final rinsing, the careful hanging in the back of the wardrobe, and then you wash the basin properly with the carbolic soap and put it back on the dresser, and that's it. Done. Until next month's Tuesday morning, when you'll lie in the grey light and know before you open your eyes. 24 days, approximately. You mark the calendar. Now, let's slow down for a moment, because we've been moving through this quickly, in the efficient way of people who know that standing still uses energy they don't have to spare. But there's something in the middle of Wednesday that deserves more time, something that happened at 2:30, between the woman with the tartan wool and the woman who needed embroidery thread in a very specific shade of gold that Pemberton's didn't carry, but that you knew Jacobs on Regent Street would have. A woman came in who was perhaps 40, thin, well-dressed in the way that speaks of careful maintenance rather than easy wealth. Everything clean and tidy, but not new, nothing new. She was looking for black wool, mourning cloth, the same commission you fielded yesterday morning with the ribbon, which means the city is full of people in mourning today, which is not unusual for October, when the summer's diseases have taken their toll and the autumn fevers are beginning. She was looking at the black walls with the expression of someone who has been doing a great deal of looking and is tired. Not just tired of looking at cloth, tired in the way that has nothing to do with cloth. You asked her what the piece was for. She told you, a dress for herself. Her mother had died 3 weeks ago and she needed to be properly in mourning, and she'd been putting off this particular errand for reasons she didn't explain and didn't need to. You helped her find the right weight of wool. You explained the difference between the dull, correct crepe weave and the more conventional worsted that would do fine and cost less. You showed her how to check the quality by holding the cloth up to the light. You told her how much she'd need for a dress if she was going to a dressmaker, and how much if she was doing it herself. She asked how much the better quality cost. You told her. She was quiet for a moment. You recognized the calculation. You do it yourself all the time. Whether the better thing is worth the difference. Whether this particular moment is one that justifies the extra. My mother would have wanted the better quality, she said. Most mothers do, you said. She smiled. It was a small, tired smile, the smile of a woman doing the arithmetic of grief. She would have said I was being extravagant. You might be, you said, but the better quality will hold its drape longer. If you're going to be in mourning for the proper time, it's worth having something that lasts. She bought the better wool. You measured it out and folded it and wrapped it with the careful efficiency that is second nature after 4 years. She paid without the usual haggling, not because she didn't notice the price, but because she'd already decided. At the door she turned back. You're very good at this, she said. You didn't know what to say to that. You thanked her. She left. And you stood at your counter with the cramp doing its Wednesday thing and Mr. Pierce somewhere behind you watching the clock, and you thought about what she'd said, and then a new customer arrived and you didn't think about it anymore. But it stayed. It's still staying. You're very good at this. You are. 4 years of standing in this exact spot, measuring fabric and counting money and reading what people need before they've fully articulated it themselves, has made you genuinely skilled. Not just technically competent, genuinely good. You can look at a woman's dress and tell you what weight of fabric it was made from and roughly where it was bought. You can handle a bolt of cloth and estimate the yardage without a yardstick. You can navigate the specific social algebra of a customer who wants to spend more than she planned without quite knowing that's what she wants. These are real skills, hard-earned skills, the kind of skills that take years to develop and that you carry in your hands and your eyes and your ears, in your knowledge of the counters and the stock and the rhythms of the shop floor. Mr. Pierce knows it in his way. The customers know it. Agnes knows it. You know it. And this is something that exists alongside the calculation, alongside the flannel and the stone bottle and the cold water in the basin. This competence, this daily practice of being very good at something, it coexists with the invisible management, the parallel running, the performance of fine. Both things are true simultaneously. And the Victorians, with their medical theories and their physiological vulnerability frameworks, would struggle to hold both of these things as equally true. Because Dr. Maudsley's women, the ones whose menstrual weeks render them unfit for mental exertion, cannot also be Eleanor Marsh, who sold 12 yards of tartan wool and 3 yards of morning crepe and 4 other transactions of varying complexity on Wednesday the 15th of October 1876, while her body was doing the thing it was doing, without missing a step. Both of these things are happening. The cramping and the competence, the management and the skill, This is what the Victorians couldn't quite see. What was invisible not because it was hidden, but because the framework they were working with had no place for it. The framework had women as either capable or indisposed, present or ill, on the floor or sent home. What it didn't have was women who were both simultaneously always doing two things at once as a permanent condition of the working life, carrying the management in one hand and the skill in the other, walking through the 10 hours with both. This is what costs, not any single thing, the cumulative cost of the and, of doing both, always both, for the 48 times a year that the and applies, for the 35 years of the working life. And the extraordinary, unremarked thing is that the and is simply the standard operating condition of a working woman's life. It's not a heroic exception. It's Tuesday. Agnes Pierce has been doing it for 16 years. She does it with such complete efficiency that it no longer takes any visible effort. She does it the way a very skilled pianist plays difficult music, so practiced that the difficulty has become invisible, absorbed into the fingers, expressed as ease. Ease is the final product of enormous invisible effort. This is something the Victorian system benefited from without acknowledging. The system benefited from women being very good at the and. It benefited from the parallel running, the managed performances, the continued work. And it provided in return no seat, no medical research, no acknowledgement that the an existed. The standard response when a woman pointed at the and was to question whether the woman was in fact well enough to be working at all, which effectively punished her for noticing her own condition. Agnes does not point. Agnes leaves pins. Agnes leaves extra cloth in the bottom drawer. This is the compromise of the century, the compromise that women made with the system because the system wasn't offering anything better. Manage it yourself, manage it invisibly, manage it with other women's help and the small practical kindnesses of the parallel world. And they did, and they were very good at it. And while they were being very good at it, a woman named Elizabeth Garrett Anderson was building a dispensary in Marylebone, and a woman named Josephine Butler was speaking in public about women's bodies, and a woman named Barbara Bodichon was writing pamphlets about women's suffrage, and a dozen women were trying to hold their degrees at Cambridge and being told they could study but not graduate, and all of them were managing the and as well. They were writing the pamphlets and managing the and. They were qualifying as the first female physician in England and managing the and. They were arguing in public about women's right to own property and managing the and. The eventual world, the one where the seat comes and the vote comes and the ibuprofen comes, was being argued into existence by women who were simultaneously doing all the things the argument said women should be able to do. This is the and. This is how it always works. You close the drawer. A new customer arrives. You look up and arrange your professional face and say good afternoon and ask how you can help. Let me take you through the wider year now, because the weekly rhythm exists inside a larger one, and the larger one has its own particular texture. Summer is the hardest season for this. Summer in London, 1876, means heat that has nowhere to go in the narrow streets, heat that builds in the brick and stone from morning and radiates back out in the evening so the nights don't cool properly. The shop floor in summer smells of hot cloth and the warm bodies of customers and the particular top note of perspiration that no amount of lavender water quite covers. The flannel in summer is misery. The stone bottle is unnecessary, but the water you need to drink is more, and the intervals between visits to the necessary are tighter, and the whole calculation becomes more complex. Agnes says nothing about summer. She just adjusts. subtly, without announcement, more frequent covers, a word in the mornings that tells you she knows what the season brings. Autumn you already know. October, as we've seen. The cold is actually easier in some ways. The flannel is tolerable. The stone bottle is more effective. The walk to work in cold air clears the head. The shop floor is less oppressive. But the cold has its own costs. The hands stiffen in the early morning, making the pins harder. The cold water in the basin is colder. The walk home in the dark is colder. Winter is the cold, unqualified. December and January. The coal fire in the lodging-house kitchen never seems to heat the water quite enough. The flannel strips you hang to dry behind the wardrobe take longer to dry because the air is damp and cold, and you sometimes find them still slightly damp on the morning you need them, which is its own particular misery. But winter also brings the shop's busiest period. The Christmas trade. When Mr. Pemberton himself sometimes appears on the floor with a benevolent seasonal manner that is entirely different from his ordinary countenance, when the counter is doing twice its usual volume, when you're measuring and folding and calculating prices from morning to close without pause. You like the busy. In the busy, the calculation runs entirely in the background. You're too occupied for the pain to take up space in the foreground. Spring is the kindest. March and April, when the worst of the cold is receding and the worst of the heat hasn't arrived, when the flannel is merely cloth, and the stone bottle is merely useful, and the cramp is what it is, and the day contains, alongside everything else, occasional actual pleasure. The light through the shop windows in late afternoon in April is a specific quality of light, golden and level, that makes even the navy blue of your dress look different, softer, and you catch it sometimes in the glass of the cabinet behind the counter and think, well, all right, this is all right. This is the year then. The year of Eleanor Marsh, counter assistant 22 years old, standing on Oxford Street in all its seasons, managing the calculation, continuing. She will continue to continue for many more years. She will learn eventually about the Seats Act that Agnes mentioned, and she will stand at her counter the first day the stools appear behind it, and the relief in her legs will be so enormous she'll have to look at the ceiling for a moment to keep her face composed. She will not get the vote in her lifetime, as it turns out. The vote will come in 1918, when Eleanor is 64, the vote for women over 30 who meet a property qualification, and then in 1928, when she is 74, the full equal suffrage. She'll be alive for both of them. She'll mark both of those dates in her calendar with a different kind of mark. She will not marry. Not Agnes's deliberate unmarrying, not exactly, but the quiet accumulation of circumstances and preferences and years that makes it one day simply true that she hasn't, and then true that she won't, and then no longer something to have feelings about. She will work at Pemberton's until her early 50s, when her feet finally make the decision for her. She'll move to a less demanding position, a smaller shop, a quarter-time arrangement, and eventually to nothing. She and Maud will share rooms until Maud marries, and then she'll find other rooms, smaller, cheaper, and they'll be fine. She'll read about the medical developments. She'll follow, in the newspapers and the periodicals, the slow progress of women in medicine, in education, in the law. She'll be interested but not surprised. Agnes said eventually, and Agnes was right. But in October 1876, Eleanor Marsh is 22 years old, and she has 4 years of knowledge and a worn left boot and 4 safety pins in the bottom drawer at Pemberton's, and a sister who put the water on without being asked. This is what she has. It's enough. And now, With the shop floor closed and the walk done and the laundry managed and the cold room around you, it's time to rest. You have earned this rest. You've earned it with the calculation and the stone bottle and the 10 hours on your feet and the professional face that never changed. You've earned it with the Tuesday and the Wednesday and the Thursday and the Friday and the Saturday, with the 400 and something more weeks ahead of you that you'll manage the same way, with the same practical intelligence, with the same parallel world network of women who know what women need. You've earned the quiet now. The room is dark. Maud is breathing slow and even. Outside, London is doing its late evening things, the sounds coming up through the window like a familiar voice, a voice you know so well it's almost your own. Let the sounds fade now. Let the shop floor fade. Let the 12 feet of counter and the brass yardstick and Mr. Pierce's clock go quiet. Let the customers and the customers and the customers recede into the background where they belong when the day is over. Let your feet rest. Let them stop noticing the left boot's worn sole. Let the ache in the arches soften and release. Let the calculation stop. The arithmetic of the menstrual week, the pinning and the covering and the checking, let it run down the way a clock runs down when no one is winding it. You don't need it right now. It will be there in 24 days when Tuesday comes again. But right now, it doesn't need running. Let the cramp be gone. It is gone mostly in the way that things go at the end of the week, not with ceremony, but simply by no longer being present. It was there. Now it's less there. Tomorrow it won't be there at all. The body moves through these things on its own schedule, indifferent to your gratitude and your relief, simply doing what it does. Let the city be what it always is when you let it, not the overwhelming, mechanical, demanding thing that requires constant navigation. Just the sound of it, the perpetual sound of 4 million people and their 4 million lives, all of it continuous and various and somehow comforting at this distance, from this height, from this warm side of the locked window. Someone is playing a piano somewhere in the building across the court. It's not a skilled someone. The notes are slow and halting, the same short melody repeated. A child, perhaps, or an adult who is learning late, and the repetition has its own particular quality in the October night, patient and unhurried, trying again and again. The church bell on Wigmore Street rings 10 o'clock. Your eyes are heavy, not in the way they're heavy when you're fighting sleep, but in the honest way of a body that has done its work and is ready for the absence of consciousness. Let it come. Let sleep come the way it comes to Eleanor Marsh in her attic room, in her cold room, after her long week, on Saturday evening when the week is finished and the week is done and there are 23 days until the next one. Let the sounds of the city soften into something like music, the hoof on the cobblestone, the distant voice, the piano still trying its patient melody. Let the dark be simple dark, without calculation, without the morning's early arrival anticipated, just dark for its own sake. Let your body be what it always is when it's finally allowed to be still, warm enough under its blanket, present enough in its own particular aliveness, done with the long work of the day. This is what the end of the week looks like. Not triumph, not defeat, just the end of the week. You've been carrying something all week that the city doesn't officially acknowledge. You've been carrying it invisibly, skillfully, in the company of other women who are carrying it invisibly and skillfully, and the carrying hasn't broken you, or diminished you, or proven anything that Dr. Maudsley would have you believe about the incompatibility of women and sustained effort. It's proven the opposite. But you don't need to think about that right now. Right now there's just the dark and the breathing and the sounds of the city going about its business and the long welcome quiet of sleep approaching. Centuries will pass. They are passing already, even now from the distance of the telling. The London, the Oxford Street with its counters and its navy blue and its 10-hour standing requirement, will change beyond recognition. The rules will change, the tools will change, the medical framework will change slowly, unevenly, with many delays and wrong turns. But it will change. The women won't change exactly. They'll change in the specific and wonderful way that everything changes while remaining what it is. They'll be different from you, and from Agnes, and from Maud, shaped by their different decades, and their different tools, and their different cities. But they'll be doing the same thing you're doing, in their own ways, in their own languages, carrying what their bodies carry, managing what needs managing, finding the network of women who know what women need, passing the knowledge along, the safety pins in some form, the warm stone bottle in some other form, the nod that means I know what today is. This knowledge doesn't stop moving. This knowledge is always moving. It moved from your grandmother to your mother to you to Maud, who put the water on without being asked. It moved from Agnes to the girl before you, and the girl before her, and to whoever comes to your counter after you've gone. The new one. The one from outside London who doesn't know the streets yet. The one you'll show where Agnes keeps the pins. 'Cause you'll know, and you'll see, and you'll leave the pins. You already know this about yourself, though you haven't put it in words. You're going to be the one who leaves the pins. But that's tomorrow, and tomorrow's version of tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after. Right now there's just the dark room and the sound of the city and the even breathing of the sister across the room and the particular piece of someone who has done a week's hard, invisible work and is now finally allowed to stop. Sleep is here. It's been waiting patiently, the way sleep waits, the way only the most patient things wait, without urgency, knowing it will have what it needs eventually. Let it. Let your thoughts slow. Let the images of the day soften at the edges. The counter, the customers, the navy blue, the dome of St. Paul's seen from the side street in the Wednesday evening haze. All of it softening, all of it becoming less precise. The church bell rings the half hour. 10:30 probably. 5.5 hours until dawn, when the city will begin again, and with it eventually the calculation. But not yet. Not yet. Not yet. Just this now. Just the dark and the breathing and the quiet that is waiting for you on the other side of the week. You've earned it. Take it. And wherever you are, reading this or listening to this, in whatever year and whatever city, whatever version of the calculation is yours, you've earned it too. Some things don't change. The need for rest at the end of the long work of the day, the warm room, or the warm enough room, the breathing of the person across from you, or the knowledge that they're there. These things don't change. Sleep. Good night. There is one more thing that needs to be said before we let the evening take us fully. One more piece of the picture that belongs in this story. There's a building in Marylebone, 4 streets from your lodging house. Not a grand building. Not one of the ones that announces itself with columns and a stone facade and the kind of permanence that says, I belong to history. It's an ordinary Victorian terraced house, converted, with a small brass plate beside the door and a waiting room that smells of carbolic and waiting. This is Elizabeth Garrett Anderson's dispensary, the new hospital for women and children it will eventually become. But in 1876 it's still the dispensary that she opened in 1866, when she was 30 10 years ago, after qualifying as the first woman to obtain a British medical degree and setting up practice in London in the face of the medical register's systematic attempts to prevent her from doing so. Anderson, at 40, in 1876, is already a figure of consequence. You've heard her name, from Agnes, from the pamphlets. You've not been to a dispensary because the dispensary is sixpence and you spent your penny at the parish one. And because the dispensary is for women who know to go there, and knowing to go there requires access to the information that it exists, and that information moves, as all information moves, through the network. But here is what happens in that dispensary. 4 streets from where you sleep, women come in, working women, mostly. The kind of women Mr. Maudsley would look at and see evidence of what standing and working during menstruation does to a woman over time. Tired women. Women whose backs hurt, whose hands are worn, whose feet have been standing for too long for too many years. Anderson sees them. She talks to them. She asks about their work and their diet and their housing and their history. She's building through hundreds of these conversations, through the accumulated detail of women's lives lived in the actual world, a picture of women's health that the official medical literature doesn't have. Because the official medical literature isn't talking to these women. She's building the case, patiently, carefully, with her characteristic combination of rigour and warmth, that women's bodies are worth understanding on their own terms, not as aberrations from the male norm, not as mechanisms that occasionally malfunction and require management, as bodies with their own physiology, their own particular requirements, their own pattern of strength and vulnerability, deserving of the same serious medical attention that has, for the past several centuries, been largely directed at male bodies. She's going to be right about this. History is going to prove her very right about this. The medical research of the 20th and 21st centuries, when it finally gets properly funded and properly prioritised, is going to discover that a great deal of what the Victorians treated as female weakness and physiological instability was in fact undertreated specific conditions, inadequate nutrition, the physical consequences of poverty and overwork, and the sometimes severe real effects of conditions like dysmenorrhea and endometriosis that had been dismissed as feminine nervousness. The pain was real. It was being managed without the understanding of why it was happening or how to most effectively treat it. And the reason it was being managed without understanding was that the understanding was not being sought with any urgency, because the people who were in pain were women, and women's pain had been categorized as a psychological symptom for long enough that the categorization had become invisible, had become just what women's pain was. Anderson knows this. She's building the alternative, one consultation at a time. 4 streets from where you sleep. You might go there, eventually. Agnes might tell you to go, or you might read about it in one of the pamphlets, or a customer might mention it, or Maud might say she went and it changed something for her. The network moves the information. The information moves you. But not tonight. Tonight you're in your cold room. The city is doing its night things. The clock on the landing is measuring the hours toward the morning when the calculation begins again. And 4 streets away, Anderson is probably still in her surgery, writing up her notes in the careful handwriting that will eventually become part of the medical record of women's lives in Victorian London. The small, specific, important details, what she observed, what she treated, what worked, the record that didn't exist before her and exists because she made it exist. Some history is made in parliaments, and some is made in pamphlets, and some is made in the brass plate consulting rooms of converted terraced houses 4 streets from a lodging house cold room, where a woman who cannot afford sixpence is lying in the dark doing the arithmetic of whether the week is over. It's over. The week is over. Close your eyes now. The sounds of the city are distant now, and they're not demands, just sounds. Just the great continuous hum of 4 million lives, and you're small inside it. Eleanor Marsh, 22. And the smallness is fine. The smallness is actually fine, because inside the smallness, there's everything that matters. The skill in your hands and the knowledge in your head, and the sister asleep across the room, and the safety pins in the drawer and the warm stone bottle, and the way the October light looked on the dome from the side street. The sounds soften. The cramp is gone. The calculation is quiet. Just dark. Just breathing. Just the long, patient night. Everything will be the same in the morning mostly. The boot with the worn sole, the navy dress on the hook, the calculation before you open your eyes, the counter and the customers and the clock doing its 10 hours, but you will be there. With your 4 years and your skill and your inherited knowledge and your practical intelligence and your network of women who know what women need, you'll be there. You're always there. Sleep now. Good night. And if you find yourself awake in the night, if sleep is slow tonight, let the city be your company, not demanding your attention, not requiring your performance, just present, as it always is, as it was on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and Saturday, as it will be when you open your eyes in 23 days and 23 days after that and all the days that follow. It was there before you came to it, and it will be thereafter. But tonight it belongs to you, to the part of the night that belongs to rest, to the body finally given permission to stop being Eleanor Marsh, counter assistant entirely fine, and just be the body that earned the sleep it's being given. Warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a roof and a trade and a sister who knows, and a woman 4 streets away who is building the future of women's medicine, one consultation at a time, even if you don't know her yet, even if you never meet, because the future she's building will arrive regardless of whether you're watching it be built. The cold room is warm enough under the blanket. The October night is London, and London is the city, and the city is the ongoing human story, and the ongoing human story includes this room and this woman and this week, even when it doesn't write it down, even when it pretends the week didn't happen, even when the pamphlets and the parliamentary debates are about something other than the safety pins. The safety pins are real. The stone bottle, gone cold now in the pocket of the dress on the hook, is real. The calculation that starts before you open your eyes is real. All of it is real, and it belongs to the city, and the city belongs to the people who live in it, and Eleanor Marsh lives in it, and she is here, and she is resting. Sleep comes the way it comes at the end of the week that needed ending. Not like a wave, not dramatically, but like the slow darkening of a room when the candle burns down, a gradual dimming, and then the quiet, and then nothing but the dark and the breathing, and the church bell somewhere in the distance marking the late hour, and the whole of the city, all 4 million lives of it, folded for the moment into the patience of the night. Rest now. All of it will be there in the morning. All of it will still be Tuesday's calculation waiting in the distance. The worn boot, the cold flannel, the counter and the customers and the 10 hours. But right now it's just the dark. Good night.